Hey guys. Here's part 2 of What If Naruto was sent to an alternate dimension where Minato is alive. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 13 Plans. Kakashi ran through the rubble of damaged and destroyed buildings, desperately trying to keep up with the scrap of paper that flitted ahead of him. He was quickly approaching enemy territory, where he would have more things to worry about than simply losing track of his quarry. He cursed his own slower than average speed. Thanks to his fatigue, he was barely able to match pace with the paper. As they grew closer to the Hokage Tower, Kakashi tried to estimate what damage to their forces losing that information would cause. Kakashi couldn't help but remember the Sandaime's earlier warnings about keeping the information from their opponent. "We need to prepare for every possibility," Sarutobi said, unrolling a blank scroll. "I'm sure your preparations are more than enough to capture this spy, but war is unpredictable. We can't predict everything that will happen." "Hi, Hokage-sama," Kakashi agreed. He understood entirely what the village leader was saying. He, himself, had been caught by surprise many times thanks to a lack of information or an exceptionally clever enemy. The old Hokage nodded, carefully dipped a brush into ink and began writing on the scroll. "The majority of the information I provide will be false. However, to ensure it appears genuine, I will have to include at least some authentic information. Even this small amount of information could be dangerous in enemy hands." Kakashi nodded in understanding, eyes steady on his leader as the older man drew out seals and wrote lines mixing truth and falsehoods with a practiced hand. "We know that the enemy had several goals when attacking our village. One, undoubtedly, was to reduce our military strength and force, an objective they clearly achieved. Another may have been to start a war between Iwa and ourselves, which is a definite possibility. The third objective, I'm certain, was to kidnap Uzumaki Naruto and gain possession of the Kyuubi." Kakashi's eye narrowed. He could well believe the enemy was after Naruto specifically. The enemy had been attempting to take Naruto out of the village when Kakashi and his group of Anbu caught up with them at the beginning of the invasion. Jinchuriki were constant targets of both abduction and assassination wherever they were, so the idea that Naruto was one of the enemy's goals was not a surprising one in principle. The surprising thing was that they knew about Naruto's status at all. The villagers, for all their dislike and even hatred of Naruto, had never broken the Sandaime's law about talking of the demon fox or Naruto's status. The few who had come close were severely punished and served as an effective example for the rest of the village. That left the question of how the enemy knew that Naruto was a Jinchuriki. True, they'd had a spy in their midst, but Kakashi wasn't convinced that this particular leak was Q's work. Some part of the puzzle was missing. He just hoped it didn't mean that they had more than one spy in Konoha, especially someone with higher clearance, or a longer history in their ranks. Watching the Sandaime and notes surrounding a diagram, Kakashi felt his determination harden. He would not fail in this mission. The enemy had already invaded their home. He would not let them have his sensei's son as well. The information thereafter pertains to Naruto's location, then. The Sandaime nodded, a deep frown on his face. There was a beat of silence, and for a moment Kakashi thought the Hokage would stop there, but the old man elaborated. "I sent Naruto to another dimension. Months ago I was astonished to find one of my old experiments come to life, a prototype for my looking glass that never properly worked. What astonished me most was that instead of viewing another place in this world, I was seeing the same place in another potential world. I began conversing with the Hokage of that Konoha. Among other things, we discussed the possibility of sending objects through the glass, purely as academic curiosity, at the time. I developed a seal specifically for that purpose, partly from my own curiosity and partly with the idea that if anything were to happen we could use that other world as a safe haven. Using that seal, I sent Naruto through to the other world where the enemy would not be able to reach him." Sarutobi pulled a large blank scroll closer to himself. He carefully drew out an intricate seal over the whole surface. When he was finished, he spun the scroll around and pushed it in front of Kakashi for inspection. "This is the seal I used to send Naruto through the glass," the Sandaime continued, returning to making the decoy scroll. "I buried the same seal into Naruto's subconscious with instructions to return when I have told him that it is safe to do so." Kakashi shifted as he let his Sharingan rove over the seal, analyzing, dissecting, memorizing it. "How can you be sure he is safe in this other world?" he asked with an uneasy tone. He didn't want Naruto in the village with everything that had been happening, but he didn't like the idea of entrusting the boy to strangers either. "He is in good hands there," the Sandaime said. The old man's voice conveyed a wealth of emotion. Kakashi was sure there was more than was being told to him. He was tempted to ask, but held himself back as a shadow passed over Sarutobi's face. However, I believe the enemy has discovered the looking glass where it was stored in the lower levels of the tower. Why else would they be so desperate to obtain the information as to risk their spy? Kakashi nodded. He had to agree, and if the enemy did know about the device that the Hokage used, then they would be one step closer to getting to Naruto. It was essential they did not get the information on how to travel through the glass. The full gravity of the situation settled in Kakashi's chest. This was one mission he could not fail. Tearing through the rubble of his village, Kakashi felt the same determination from the earlier conversation harden like steel. He noted the distance he had traveled since leaving the temporary headquarters. Though he didn't know the precise position of the lines at the moment, he knew that he'd be passing into enemy territory soon. However, the thought of stopping and turning around never entered into his mind. As he noted before in his meeting with the Hokage, failure was not an option on this mission. If he stopped, it would be because he was dead. Looking up, Kakashi could see the Hokage tower quickly approaching, which meant he was behind the enemy lines. Making extra care to continue on silently, he mentally prayed that no one had noticed his entrance or his passing, at least until he caught the paper and returned to a safe area. The room was filled with hushed voices and shifting bodies as the tower staff and the Jounin commanders waited for their Hokage to begin. Minato eyed the group. Normally, he would try to be more approachable, smile and talk with those he knew well, but today he wanted to emphasize his position of Hokage and the respect that went along with it. His more serious demeanor was in part due to the reaction he had received from the council and village elders. They had been skeptical and, in some cases, expressed outright denial over the possibility that his son could have survived. He hadn't thought he'd need the blood work Tsunade had done, but the elders had proved him wrong on that account. The very thought of it brought a slight scowl to his face. Hopefully, his attitude would also encourage the staff to stop gossiping about their leader. He waited several more minutes, giving the stragglers a chance to slip through the door and pretend they were there the entire time. I've called this meeting to discuss a somewhat serious and complicated matter. Minato began, gaze sweeping across the crowd of Jounin and staff assembled before him. Many of you have probably heard and perhaps even seen a boy with a surprising likeness to myself. There was a ripple of movement through the staff gathered in the room, and Minato knew that they knew exactly who he was talking about. I feel I should clear up any confusion surrounding this rumor. First, let me say the boy is my son, Naruto. Whispers, and even some gasps, broke out in the back of the room at the revelation, mainly among the civilian employees present. Minato could see the questions already forming on several people's lips, so he continued, preemptively answering them. This was the hard part. As many of you know, my son was reported as stillborn 8 years ago. However, that report was false. My son survived and I placed him into hiding as a protection against the perpetrators of the attack. He's growing up, though, and cannot spend his entire life hidden away from his home village. So I have decided to bring him home to stay with me. The whispering had now spread throughout the entire assembly, civilians and shinobi alike. Minato allowed the shock and surprise to settle for a few moments before speaking again. If any of you have questions about the validity of my claim, Tsunade-sama has the results of the blood work for your perusal, should you need it. Next to him, Tsunade brandished a scroll, unrolling it enough to show its contents were indeed the results from a blood test. Whether it was due to Minato's slightly frosty tone or Tsunade's scowl, no one stepped forward to question the Hokage's claim due to curiosity or political aspirations. This is considered an A-ranked secret, Minato continued. Though I've brought Naruto out of hiding, I do not want other villages to know about him yet. In fact, the longer it takes for word to get out, the better. So, if you have been talking about this matter dash. Several people ducked their heads or shifted from one foot to the other in embarrassment. Or have heard anyone talking about it, kindly inform them it is classified for the time being. Hokage-sama. One staff member spoke up from the midst of the crowd, raising a hand to be seen. Minato recognized him as the senior instructor in charge of the academy. Will your son be attending school next year? He should be 8 now, am I correct? Minato nodded, acknowledging his question. That's a little far off to plan just now. We'll see how things develop and how well he adjusts to his new situation. But where have you been keeping him? Another voice came from the back of the group. Somewhere very safe, Minato said, hedging the question. Thank you for your time. I'm sure you all have other things you need to be doing. The crowd bowed and began to disperse, a slow trickle out of the room. Shikaku came through the crowd, bowing slightly as he drew near, and Minato gestured him forward. Hokage-sama, how did you injure your hands? The Nara asked with a subdued tone, just audible over the shifting and talking of the group as people left the room. Minato didn't let any reaction touch his face. He had been wondering if anyone would have the nerve to ask. There'd been almost as many stares and whispers concerning his bandaged hands as there had been speculating as to the meeting's purpose. It wasn't too surprising that Shikaka asked, telling Shikaka and, in turn, everyone in hearing distance, that he'd injured his hands trying to control the Kyuubi's chakra as it used his son as a focal point to recoalesce was unthinkable. So Minato did the next best thing. He lied. I was working on an experiment last night, and it got out of hand. I have already had them looked at and they are basically fine, and will heal completely with time. That's very good to hear, Hokage-sama. Shikaka's bright, intelligent eyes surveyed the damaged arms and Minato's face. Minato looked back with an expression carved from stone. He could tell that the Nara clan leader knew he was lying, but Shikaku was loyal and, more importantly, knew how keeping confidence and maintaining faith in a hidden village worked. He would not tell anyone his suspicions, not that he had much to tell in the first place. All he knew was that Minato did not injure his arms in an experiment. What could become troublesome was that Minato was lying about more than just the origin of his wounds. While he was basically healed and could use his arms and hands to mold chakra and perform jutsu, he was also far from recovered. His arms hurt if he used them too much or too fast. Lifting heavy loads was next to impossible, too, and according to Tsunade the symptoms could go on for days or even weeks. There was just no telling when the remnant of Kyuubi's chakra would work its way out of its system. Given more information, Shikaka might be able to figure out more, but Minato wasn't going to allow that to happen. He nodded his thanks for the concern and, turning from the still crowded room, Minato headed toward the door. Turning the corner to move toward his office, Minato breathed a sigh of relief. That was one less thing for him to worry about, but the ones that remained were too many to count. Naruto felt better than he had in days. He had almost a full night's sleep, staying in bed late that morning after the nightmare and subsequent checkup and talk. When Minato had taken him back to his room, they found Kakashi and Rin plastering his walls with seals. When he'd asked what they were for, the silver-haired man replied in that bored tone without batting an eye. They're magic symbols to keep bad dreams away. Really? Naruto had gasped, looking at the square bits of paper lining the wall with a new eye. The symbols looked like regular seals to him, though he couldn't tell what type. They hadn't even come close to breaching the topic in the academy. He just barely caught Rin rolling her eyes at Kakashi's explanation. Either way, Naruto didn't care. Whether they were magical symbols or just regular seals, they had done the job, and Naruto didn't have a single nightmare until he woke late the next morning. Even as he moved around the house, he felt better, less frustrated and annoyed with everything. The slightly restless feeling was still there, like he was waiting for something that he couldn't remember. The itching in the back of his skull was still there, too, but it was easier to stand. Naruto spent the rest of the morning helping Kakashi make a grocery list, mainly reminding the silver-headed man to add more instant ramen. After lunch, Naruto retreated to his room to begin planning his prank on the taciturn man. That was where Rin found him almost an hour later. Here you are, Rin said as she eased open the door. I was wondering if I was going to have to hunt you down again. She grimaced slightly at the thought. Naruto grinned, one hand going to the back of his head. Sorry about that, Rin-Neeson. Rin just chuckled. As long as I don't have to go through a gauntlet like that again. You're a handful, you know that? She cautiously stepped into the room, stopping not too far from the door and leaning against the wall. What are you doing in here all alone? An edge of suspicion entered her tone, and she eyed the room around her as if expecting a can of paint to drop from nowhere. Naruto hesitated, saying anything. After all, he never shared his pranks with anyone else, but then again, he never had anyone to share them with in the first place. Suddenly, he wanted someone else to be in on the joke, to laugh with him when he managed to pull it off and get Kakashi. Still, he wasn't sure if Rin would be the right choice. She hadn't liked his pranks before, but that might have been because she'd gotten caught in all of them. Minato was at work and Kakashi was gone shopping for grocery supplies, not that he'd be able to tell Kakashi since he was Naruto's next target in the first place. So that left Rin. Naruto eyed the kunoichi in front of him. She could be fun sometimes, and if he promised not to get her, then maybe she would help. Actually, I'm planning a prank for Kakashi. Naruto-kun, you know what Minato? Rin started but stopped halfway through her protest, eyes narrowing just slightly. You're planning it for Kakashi? Yeah. I mean Dad said I could. Naruto added in the last part quickly, wanting to make sure Rin understood he had permission. The kunoichi was quiet for a moment, but the slowly growing grin on her face and distant look in her eyes made Naruto believe that she wasn't worrying over him breaking the no-prank rule. She looked down at Naruto sitting on his bed, scribbles of possible ideas scattered around him on scrap paper drawn in crayon. Think you might want some help? Rin asked, the grin on her face huge and devious. Naruto looked at her, surprised for a moment, before an equally large and devious grin spread across his. He nodded vigorously, excited by the prospect of sharing his awesome prank with someone and feeling lighter than he had since the attack in the old Konoha. Yeah, Databayo. His words seemed to throw Rin off for a moment, as she stared at him in vague shock, but then the grin was back. Tussling his hair, Rin chuckled. Just like your mother. The comment made Naruto's heart skip a beat. His mother? Something about him was just like his mother? He knew he looked just like his dad, that was obvious to anyone with eyes, but it hadn't occurred to him that he didn't know anything about his mother. A sudden desire to know her swept through him. What was she like? What was her name? Where had she gone? Rin sat down on the edge of the bed, scooping up the sketched ideas and looking them over with that same devious expression. Now that he had someone to plan and enjoy the prank with, Naruto didn't want to distract himself asking questions, but privately he promised himself to ask his dad the moment he got a chance. These are good, Rin said, shuffling through the papers and putting some on top of the stack. But I'll tell you the secret to a great trap. Rin's voice dropped low and she leaned toward Naruto as if in preparation for telling him a guarded secret. The secret to laying a great trap as opposed to just a good one is knowing your opponent's weakness. Minato came home early from work that night. He left soon after his staff meeting, only partially sneaking past his secretary to avoid any mention of the as yet unfinished paperwork on his desk. He remembered the Sandaime complaining about the constant pressure to win the paper war but hadn't experienced it himself until recently. He could only say his new awareness of it was thanks to his equally new desire to be home. Tonight Minato had a particularly good reason for leaving early, office work finished or unfinished, in case anyone confronted him. He needed to finish placing seals around the house for security. Of course, no one was to know that he was primarily securing Naruto against absorbing too much of the Kyuubi's chakra at once, but he doubted anyone would wonder too deeply about the Hokage placing additional security around his recently returned son. Kakashi had plastered Naruto's bedroom with the temporary seal suppressants already, but it was a temporary fix. They needed something more permanent and to withstand the Kyuubi's corrosive chakra. Minato had spent a large part of his lunch combining barrier and chakra suppressant seals and then fine-tuning the new seals specifically to keep the Kyuubi's chakra at bay. The Kyuubi's chakra was unique and he was sure that he would be able to stop it from entering the house and suppress any already in the structure without unduly affecting his own or anyone else's. He'd also drawn up more regular suppressant seals to keep on hand at all times, just in case. The new seals should allow Naruto to move freely through the house and sleep without nightmares, but it was still just a temporary measure. Minato didn't know how well the seal would work without a physical barrier as well, and he was hesitant to put Naruto in danger to try it out on open ground, which meant his energetic son was still confined indoors. Kakashi and Rin would not be happy about that, much less Naruto himself, especially when they'd just given a credible explanation to the village about Naruto's presence. Dropping down onto his front steps, Minato tried to lighten the thoughtful frown on his face. He didn't want to worry Naruto. The boy didn't know about the Kyuubi as far as Minato could tell, and he was fine maintaining this ignorance for as long as possible. He remembered the weight Kushina had to bear when she was the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki, and he wanted his son free of that same weight for as long as possible. He didn't know, specifically, if ignorance would help, but he was willing to try it with both the village and Naruto for as long as he could manage. Opening the door, Minato set the notes for his new seal and the stack of suppressant seals down while he removed his sandals. "I'm home," he called, a brief but genuine smile lighting his face as he remembered what it was like to have someone to yell that to, but the announcement was met with silence. Frowning now in confusion as well as a small amount of suspicion, Minato paused. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. He looked inside the sitting room to find it empty as well as the kitchen and the entire first floor. The more rooms Minato entered, the more cautious he became, very well aware of the one prank deal that he had made with his son. Naruto was supposed to be targeting Kakashi, but there were no guarantees. By the time Minato reached the stairs, he was feeling downright paranoid. He ascended the stairs slowly, ready to move at a moment's notice and only briefly reflecting on the absurdity of his situation. Naruto was an 8-year-old, hardly a threat to a ninja as experienced as Minato, but the possibility that said 8-year-old had managed to booby-trap some part of the house was entirely real, and that was enough for him. Minato found Naruto and Rin in the boys' room. He heard their low voices carrying through the door before he saw them, knocking a few times before pushing the door open. Naruto and Rin both froze, looking up at the door with wide eyes. They both caught sight of Minato and sagged in relief. "You're home early," Rin said with an innocent smile. Minato stopped at the bright tone and face. It threw him for a loop, and for a moment all he could do was blink at the woman in his son's room as Naruto nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, I dash." Minato started but interrupted himself. He didn't want Naruto to know about the Kyuubi, or the need for seals everywhere at the moment. I had some chores to get done, so I came home. What are you two doing up here? Oh, well, Rin started. Beside her, Naruto opened his mouth, undoubtedly to proclaim whatever scheme the two of them had begun, but Rin clamped a hand over his mouth. It's a surprise, she said finally, with a nod and a smile. That didn't make Minato feel any better as he looked from Rin's innocent smile to Naruto's growing mischievous one. Please let them be planning something for Kakashi, Minato prayed silently. Well, I'll be downstairs. All right, sensei, Rin said, not so subtly urging Minato out the door. Right, Minato said, hesitant to ask more. The door snapped shut in his face, and he blinked for a moment at the wood planks. Please let it be for Kakashi, he murmured again as he turned away and headed back downstairs. Stopping briefly at his office to pick up his sealing ink, Minato made his way downstairs. He decided to start at the corner of the house in the kitchen. He would work his way around the outer wall, placing seals at regular intervals to prevent the Kyuubi's chakra from seeping into the house. Then, he would do the same for the upper level, as well. Minato set up the finished seal he had created and began the careful process of copying it precisely. He moved slowly and rechecked his work constantly, not willing to risk making a mistake. He had just finished the first seal and was checking over for any errors when Kakashi entered the room, carrying bags of groceries. Welcome home, sensei, Kakashi said, setting the groceries on the table and pulling them out of their bags. Minato looked over at a bag filled only with instant cup ramen and glanced at Kakashi. Don't tell me, Naruto helped write the grocery list. More like badgered me about ramen while I wrote the grocery list, Kakashi corrected. At the time it seemed like a good way to shut the kid up, but now I think I'm going to have to deal with Rin. At least I didn't get as much as your kid wanted in the first place. Minato chuckled and turned back to the drying seal on the wall. He's so much like his mother, he said quietly, wistfully. Is that the new seal you were going to make? Kakashi asked, his abrupt change of topics not going unnoticed by Minato. He abandoned the groceries on the table and stepped next to his sensei to better examine the finished seal. Yes, Minato said, stowing away the surge of nostalgia that had threatened to take hold. If it does what it's supposed to, it'll only suppress the Kyuubi's chakra as opposed to just any chakra, leaving us free to use jutsu if needed and practice with Naruto if we so choose. That's if I've gotten everything correct on the first try. I want you and Rin to carry around chakra suppressants, just in case, until we know if and how well this thing works. Kakashi nodded, picking up the version written on the scroll. He pushed up his headband, revealing his Sharingan eye, and looked over every detail of the scroll. When I'm finished with the groceries, I'll help place them around the wall. Minato nodded his thanks only to grimace when Kakashi continued. The silver-haired man had turned back to the table and didn't see the gesture. It's a good thing Rin is keeping Naruto busy. It'll make this much easier without any interruptions. Minato turned back to the seal still waiting to be activated and bit his lip. He thought about the two upstairs and Naruto's devious smile, and wondered if he should warn Kakashi. He didn't really think Naruto would manage to pull anything over on the copy, but Rin was helping him. That changed things. Shaking his head, Minato dismissed any ideas about warnings. It would help keep Kakashi on his toes. As if summoned by the thought, pattering footsteps made their way down the upstairs hallway and down the staircase. A moment later Naruto appeared in the room, his eyes landing on Kakashi immediately, and a smile flashed across his face. Rin appeared a moment later at a more sedate pace. She brushed past Naruto and sat down at the kitchen table after pouring herself a drink. Oh, you're finally back, Rin said. Yeah, you took forever, Naruto added, following Rin's example and sitting down at the table. His smile widened a little more when he saw the bag of ramen and he pulled it toward him, examining the flavors present. However, even while perusing the ramen, Naruto's eyes kept coming up to find Kakashi. Well, at least it isn't me, Minato thought to himself watching the two figures at the table. Whatever they were planning, apparently they were expecting it soon. Rin was fighting a grin as she sipped her water and Naruto didn't bother to hide his, though whether it was for an anticipated prank or the ramen now sitting directly in front of him was difficult to determine. Minato was happy to see the grin on Naruto's face was more carefree, happier and wider than it had been the last several days, maybe since Naruto first came. Blocking the Kyuubi's chakra had done wonders. Kakashi seemed to notice the attention from the two as well, and he stopped midway through picking up groceries to put away in the cupboards. What's wrong with you two? He asked, eyeing each one suspiciously. What are you talking about? Naruto asked, the picture of innocence on his face. Really, Kakashi-kun? Rin said, rolling her eyes. You're getting paranoid in your old age. Kakashi hummed, moving to the cupboards to put away the canned goods. He paused a moment, frowning back at the two at the table, then slid his gaze over to Minato a moment before turning back to the cupboard. Behind Kakashi's back, Minato could see both Rin and Naruto tense just slightly in anticipation. Kakashi wrenched the cupboard door open and sprang back, ready for anything but what happened, which was nothing. A minute passed by and still nothing happened, making the silver-haired ninja drop his shoulders and chuckle in embarrassment. He moved back to the cupboard, reaching up to put away the canned bean sprouts. "Ma, from the way you two were acting I was sure you'd done some dash." Bang! The confetti exploded out of the cupboard, dousing Kakashi in strips of paper as he stood frozen with his hand half extended. Naruto burst into laughter, slapping his hand on the table as Rin chuckled beside him. Minato laughed as well as the exasperated look on Kakashi's face was priceless. "Well, I guess you got me," Kakashi sighed, shaking his head and sending a cascade of paper to the floor. "Though I didn't know you were up to something, your element of surprise could do with a little work." Minato saw through it right away. Kakashi was trying to play the incident off as though it were nothing. Rin saw through it as well, since her eyes narrowed and the grin turned just a little more devious. "Really, Kakashi?" The emphasis in her tone and the continued grin on Naruto's face made Minato pause. There wasn't more to it, was there? Kakashi noticed it too, and again his eyes narrowed, switching between the two pranksters. He looked down at the paper strewn over the counter and froze. Minato could see his visible eye widen in horror, and he spun to face Rin and Naruto. "You didn't." "Didn't what?" Rin asked, assumed innocence dripping from her tone. Naruto was too busy giggling beside her to put in his own comment, and Kakashi didn't wait for the boy to recover before tearing out of the kitchen. Minato could hear his footsteps pound up the stairs and down the hall toward the bedroom that he'd claimed for the time being. Now Rin and Naruto were both laughing in earnest, and in Naruto's case, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes. "What did you two do?" Minato asked, unsure if he should laugh along with them or be concerned for Kakashi's horror-stricken expression. "Just wait, Sensei, you'll find out," Rin said, calming down enough to speak clearly. "We really got him, Databeo!" Naruto cheered, punching a fist in the air. Minato felt the breath catch in his throat but managed to keep the same expression on his face, even when Rin quickly glanced toward him with nervous eyes. A moment and a careful breath later he had complete control over himself again. It was surprising to find Naruto had the same verbal tic as his mother, and Minato wondered if the prolonged exposure to the Kyuubi's chakra had really affected Naruto so much that he was only just now feeling like himself. Besides that moment of shock, Minato realized he was happy for it. It was another way Kushina could be with them both. A horrified scream cut Minato's thoughts short as he looked up toward the second floor from where it originated. Rin and Naruto burst out in a new wave of laughter. Over the sound of their guffaws, Minato could make out thumping footsteps coming back down the hall and stairs returning to the kitchen. "You did! I can't believe you two!" he fumed, storming into the room and slamming a copy of his Ika books down on the table. Except it wasn't a book, Minato realized. It was the cover of the book, the pages had all been removed. Glancing over to the confetti still on the counter and floor, it was easy to see where the innards of the books had gone. It wasn't quite fair to Kakashi. Minato knew how much those books meant to the silver-haired man, especially since Minato himself had put Naruto up to it, but despite himself, Minato huffed out a laugh. "This isn't funny, Sensei!" Kakashi protested, sounding halfway to panic. The protest only made Minato laugh harder. It made Kakashi sound more like an indignant teenager than when the copynin had actually been a teenager. Rin had gained back enough breath to push herself upright again from her slouched position over the table. "Don't worry, Kakashi-kun," she gasped, a few more chuckles escaping her. "We didn't destroy your precious books, but that's not to say you'll have an easy time finding them." Kakashi groaned in frustration, renewing Naruto's dying giggles and making Minato laugh again. Minato wondered how long it would take Kakashi to find his collection again, and if there were any extra surprises waiting for him there, as well. The moment of laughter was interrupted when a toad appeared before Minato, making everyone fall quiet. It had the telltale signs of Mt. Mayaboku, and though Minato had never seen this specific toad, he could easily tell that it belonged to Jiraiya. The creature didn't waste time speaking, it simply turned to the widest open space in the kitchen and spat out Jiraiya's bloody and beaten body onto the floor. Chapter 14, Steps. "Sensei!" Minato cried, dropping down next to Jiraiya and checking on him. Rin was around the table and running glowing green hands over the old Sannin in an instant, brow furrowed in concentration. Minato could tell that Jiraiya was alive, thanks to the shallow lifts of the man's chest, and that he'd been badly beaten, but knew little else about his condition. At the other end of the room, Kakashi had already summoned one of his ninja dogs and sent him to get Tsunade. Minato vaguely wondered how many more times the woman could be called to his house for an emergency in 1 week. What happened to him? Naruto asked in shock. Minato looked up to find his son's wide, frightened eyes fixed on Jiraiya's body. Flicking his own gaze up, he found Kakashi and jerked his head toward the door. Kakashi nodded and took Naruto by the shoulder, guiding him away from the scene and out to the hallway. What happened? Naruto asked again, still looking over his shoulder. Is he going to be alright? We don't know what happened, Minato could hear Kakashi saying. But we're going to find out, and Jiraiya's going to be fine. The man's more stubborn than you. The voices faded away into the hall and Minato looked back to Rin, opening his mouth to demand an update. Rin cut him off, though, speaking without looking up from her work as blood leaked onto the floor. He's got several broken ribs, a cracked sternum, and some internal bleeding as well as a concussion and multiple contusions. I'm working to stop the internal bleeding, but there's a lot of damage. Her voice was tight with concentration, a world's difference from the bright laughter that had filled it only minutes ago. Sensei, who could have done this? I don't know, Minato said, his own expression hard with determination. He immediately thought back to the man that they had seen through the mirror the last time they activated it, the man with the Rinnegan. He could do something like this, if he was as powerful as Jiraiya said. However, there was no guarantee that the same man was even alive in this world, so it was only supposition. The best they could hope for would be Jiraiya healing enough to wake and tell them the identity of his attacker. Even if that didn't happen, Minato would solve the mystery. But like Kakashi said, I intend to find out. Tsunade arrived quickly, not commenting on once again being summoned to the Hokage's residence. She didn't bother saying anything to anyone. She pushed the table and chairs away, crashing them into the far wall. Then, she dropped down next to her friend, green hands already lit and scanning from his head down to the torso. I've stabilized most of the internal bleeding, Rin said, focusing on Jiraiya's lower torso. Tsunade grunted, concentrating on his chest. Minato watched the scene, anger boiling up inside him. It was disturbingly similar to how Kushina had looked when she died, exhausted from childbirth, in agony from the kyubi being ripped out of her, and covered in her own blood. He'd already lost his family once when Kushina and his Naruto died. He'd be damned if he lost it again. Tsunade scowled down at the bloody mess that was Jiraiya's chest. Damn it, Minato, if you can't keep yourself in check, then get the hell out. Blinking in surprise, Minato clamped down on his chakra. He tore his eyes away from Jiraiya and hurried out the door. The medical knee needed to focus and he couldn't risk distracting them. In the hall, he let out a breath and turned, looking back at the kitchen door. Half of him still wished he was in the room so he could know how his mentor was doing, and the other half was glad to be away from the nightmarish scene. Is he gonna be alright? Naruto asked, tugging on Minato's sleeve to get his attention. Minato looked down, tearing his eyes away from the door. Naruto stared up at him, eyes wide and face pale. Minato turned the boy around and ushered him farther down the hall, away from Tsunade and Rin's hurried voices. Kakashi followed, murmuring about checking the perimeter before disappearing into the background. Jiraiya's going to be fine, Minato said. He struggled to sound reassuring in the midst of his own doubt. Tsunade will fix him up, then you can tell him all about pranking Kakashi-kun. Naruto didn't look convinced and Minato couldn't blame him. He'd never seen his sensei in such bad shape, though he'd heard about the time Tsunade caught the old pervert peeping. That was different though. No matter what Jiraiya had done, Tsunade would never go far enough in a beating to definitely kill him, or even attempt to do so. Whoever had beaten Jiraiya this time had definitely been trying to kill the man. Jiraiya's tough, Minato said, gripping Naruto's shoulder and staring back toward the kitchen. He wouldn't let something like this get the best of him. Minato wasn't sure if he was speaking more for Naruto's benefit or for his own. Shaking himself, Minato looked for something to distract Naruto. If he was lucky, then he would turn both their minds away from the kitchen and the drama unfolding inside. Latching on to his first thought, Minato said, "Did you know he's your godfather?" Naruto looked up at Minato, eyes torn away from the kitchen for the first time. My godfather? What does that mean? Minato slid down the wall until he sat on the floor. Naruto plopped down next to him, and he wrapped an arm around the small boy. A godfather is like an adopted parent in some ways. They're supposed to look after you, teach you like your real parents. So, Jiraiya's like a second dad? Naruto asked, face scrunched up at the idea. Phrased like that, Minato wasn't sure he liked it either. Well, more like an uncle, that you shouldn't really listen to half the time, at least about women, or money, or alcohol. Minato looked down at Naruto, regretting choosing this topic to talk about. You know what? Whatever Jiraiya tells you, check with me first before you act on it. Naruto's face was grave when he nodded in agreement. He is an old pervert. Minato huffed out a laugh, releasing some of the tension trapped inside him. You can say that again. He squeezed Naruto's shoulders in a quick hug. The gesture made the boy smile, but it faded away as a pensive expression appeared on his face. What is it? Minato asked. Earlier Rin said something. She said I was like my mother. Naruto glanced down at his hands before peering back up at Minato. I was wondering about her. Looking down at his son, Minato wished that Kushina was still there, if only because he'd never be able to stand up to those wide blue eyes. She would have been a much better disciplinarian. Minato melted too easily. Drawing in a deep breath, Minato looked beyond the far wall. Your mother's name was Uzumaki Kushina. She was the love of my life. Minato faltered, not sure what to say. This was more difficult than he thought it would be after so many years, especially when he'd already accepted his child's death and never thought he'd have this particular discussion. Do you have a picture? Naruto asked when Minato didn't continue after a moment. Minato nodded. He had lots of pictures, all hidden away where he couldn't see them, couldn't stumble across them by accident. Come on! He pushed off of the floor and moved to the stairs. The nearest box of pictures sat in his office. He had shoved them in a back corner under a shelf like some form of contraband, unwilling and unable to throw them away but equally reluctant to look at them. The shelf was buried under piles of scrolls and books, as hidden from the world as the box of pictures itself. Digging out both was like an excavation, traveling back in time with each layer of documents removed. Naruto hovered behind him, looking around the room with a swiveling neck. Minato supposed the only 2 times the boy had been in the room he'd been too preoccupied to really notice it, the first time setting a trap and the second time getting yelled at for said trap. As long as Naruto didn't touch anything that would harm him, Minato didn't mind the boy looking. Reaching back farther than he remembered needing to, Minato's fingers finally brushed a dusty cardboard box. He strained a few moments, fingers fumbling for the box, touching it but unable to draw it closer. A finger snagged a tear in the corner of the cardboard and managed to pull it a fraction closer. From there, he was able to get a better hold on it and drag the box into the light. The dust was thick on the lid, matted and dense from time. Minato hoped the contents weren't damaged. It had been 8 years since he'd unburied these particular memories, and they weren't stored in the most protective container. He turned around, settling into a comfortable spot on the floor against the bookshelf behind him. Patting the floor next to him, he silently invited Naruto to take a seat. Naruto dropped down, looking at the box in Minato's hands with keen interest. For a long moment they just stared at it. Part of Minato hesitated to open the box after such a long time. Naruto watched, twitching with impatience. The boy looked down at the box and reached one hand out to touch the lid. Minato placed the box in Naruto's lap after only a brief hesitation. The boy looked up at him and grinned before flipping the top off without any reservations. Are these all of Mom? Naruto asked, looking at the disorganized mound of pictures. Most, Minato said, glad to see that the pictures looked undamaged. He reached into the box, pulling out a stack for closer inspection. On top was a picture of Kushina, her long hair as red as it remained in his memories. Studying it for a minute, Minato passed it over to Naruto. That's your mother. Naruto stared at the picture for a moment, eyes wide in amazement. She has really pretty hair, he said with the same awkwardness all boys had when trying to compliment girls, even their mothers. Minato chuckled. Kushina would have been happy to hear Naruto say that. Yes, he agreed. Her hair was beautiful. What happened to her? Naruto asked, hand dipping into the box and drawing out another picture. It was of Kushina fluffing a younger Kakashi's hair. In the shot, Kakashi looked resigned, his hishie pulled down over one eye. She died, Minato said, torn between humor as he remembered the events of the picture and sorrow from his loss. Saving the village. Naruto glanced toward the door and Minato guessed what he was thinking. Jiraiya's not going to die yet, he said firmly. He's too stubborn for that. Besides, he still has to make my life hell by introducing you to girls. Naruto looked up at him with a serious expression. Girls are gross, he said, then added after a long pause. Except Sakura-chan. She's not gross, though she can be a little scary sometimes. Minato chuckled. Kushina could be scary too, he said, almost to himself. But don't let that fool you. Women have to have a tough exterior if they want to survive in the shinobi world. That doesn't mean they can't have a soft side too, just don't tell Tsunade I said that, alright? Naruto nodded, looking back down at the mound of pictures. Minato replaced the stack he had pulled out, plucking up the pictures that Naruto held and putting them in the box, too. He slipped the cover back on and stood, taking the box with him. Let's go downstairs and look through them in the sitting room. Then, Rin and Tsunade will be able to find us when they're done with Sensei. Naruto nodded, jumping to his feet and running out into the hall. Minato followed at a slower pace, locking and sealing the door behind him. There were enough pictures in the box to distract them until the medical ninja were done with what would hopefully be good news. Kakashi was close. A few times he had almost caught the paper, and he was now within grasping distance. He lunged forward, fingers brushing the very edge of the paper figure when something slammed into him from the side. The impact knocked him off course and the paper slipped through his fingers. Recovering from the surprise impact, Kakashi quickly realized that it was an enemy shinobi who had tackled him. Whether the man realized what he had done by attacking Kakashi at that precise moment, or not, he was going to pay. Kakashi spun around in the other's grip, quickly breaking the enemy's hold and taking a more advantageous position. The other shinobi grunted, realizing that the scales of power had tipped as Kakashi attacked from behind. Somewhere during the grappling, Kakashi realized that the ninja he was fighting against was barely a man, several years younger than Kakashi himself. Not that this changed anything. The young man was also a ninja, invading another country and another ninja village. Every genin accepted the risk at a young age from the moment they accepted the initiate of their village. Not to mention that because of this young man Kakashi had missed what was probably his best chance to stop the enemy from gaining potentially dangerous information. So, in short, Hatake Kakashi was pissed. Pulling out a kunai from the enemy's own pouch, Kakashi plunged it into the man's chest. He pushed against the other man's back, separating them as the enemy shinobi stumbled forward and Kakashi jumped back a few feet to land on his knees. He breathed heavily, almost spent from sleepless nights and exhausting days, but desperate to finish the fight and get back to the chase. Channeling a little lightning chakra into his blade, Kakashi leapt forward just as his opponent turned, thrusting his kunai through the man's heart. Kakashi didn't waste a step as he turned and sought the paper once again, but a cold sensation settled into his stomach. He'd lost too much distance. The altercation, mere seconds that it was, had cost him precious time and energy. Now, he didn't know how he could possibly catch up before it reached the Hokage Tower, looming above the rubble around him. As if to emphasize the point, Kakashi's legs suddenly gave out on him, collapsing under his weight. He dropped like a stone to the ground, landing on his hands and knees, panting as he felt the weakness of chakra exhaustion eating away at him. Kakashi cursed, looking up just in time to see the white speck of paper disappear into a tower window. He slammed his fist into the ground, only avoiding injury to his hand due to the weakness that coursed through him. He'd failed. Kakashi couldn't accept that he'd failed. There had to be something more he could do. Groaning, Kakashi pushed himself over onto his back. He could feel blackness encroaching on his vision but stayed conscious by sheer force of will. Looking around, he found an overhang formed by several walls and slabs of concrete that had fallen over in the street. It was low to the ground and hidden from prying eyes. Gritting his teeth with effort, Kakashi dragged himself to the cover, rolling under the rubble with the dregs of his energy. The last thing he registered was coming to a stop against the inside corner before the shadows closed in and the world went dark and silent. Pain looked over the information Conan's paper message had brought him. He studied every line and diagram with a careful eye. Their spy had sacrificed himself to obtain this information, and he didn't plan to let that sacrifice go to waste. While he wasn't concerned about the loss of a man, he did regret the loss of a valuable information source. However, if the information provided proved enough, then the benefit would be well worth the cost. Even with a cursory inspection, Pain could tell that much of the provided information was false. However, in traps like this, a skilled shinobi buried accurate information in with the false. It just took a careful eye to spot it. After all, spies could generally smell a trap when the bait was nonsensical, but truth mixed in with lies could make a trap sweet enough to catch flies. The tricky part was discerning the difference between the two. Studying the information, it was clear Konoha didn't realize that Pain had two other sources to draw from in his possession. Before him, he had the fragment of a scroll, too small to be any use on its own, but when combined with the information recently gained, it was enough to differentiate fact from fiction in several places. Then, Pain also had his own observations from the brief moment that he'd seen the mirror activated. It was both more and less helpful than the half-destroyed scrap he had found. Analyzing the chakra pads told a great deal about how the mirror worked, but it was only raw data. It needed analysis, and in some cases leaps of logic to make connections between the raw chakra pads with the notes he'd drawn out and the set of polished information stolen by his spy. Chakra pads could tell how much chakra was needed for a technique, but not the precise hand signs or seals used in a technique. It was an outline with no detail. From the information spread out before him, Pain thought he would be able to open the portal himself and perhaps send over chakra, but sending or bringing physical objects through was still out of his grasp. In theory, he could bring the Kyuubi to the other side of the mirror and drain its chakra through the mirror, but that was impractical. There was no place immediately available to store the massive amount of chakra and, more importantly, There was no way to guarantee their control over the other end of the portal for the time needed to drain all of the chakra. No, the best option would be to bring the Kyuubi's container back through and keep him somewhere secure until they needed to extract the bijou. That meant working out a way to bring solid, living things over from the other side. Pain knew he could figure out a way to do it with the information before him and some testing of his own, but it would take time, something they were short on as the Iwa forces continued to be pushed back and his faction lost their own advantage with the capture of their spy. Pulling a blank sheet of paper toward him, Pain drew out the symbols he believed would activate the mirror. He'd seen the other Hokage begin the deactivation sequence, giving him a good starting point for the activation sequence. That information served as a base which he coupled with knowledge gleaned from the intel gathered before him. Added with sources from what remained of the Hokage's private library, he began working on a possible method to move physical material from one place to another. After hours of theoretical calculation, he developed a possible solution. On paper, it seemed possible, but it was only theory, and an incomplete one at that. He was at the point where he needed some practical application of his experiments to continue. Pain stood from his place at the Hokage's old desk and moved into the hallway. He navigated through the damaged and ruined corridors, down the half-destroyed staircases and into the lowest levels of the tower. The two guards positioned by the mirror room let him pass without comment when they saw who it was. The mirror room was in the same state of disarray as when they first broke in, but the mirror itself had been cleaned and cleared of all debris. It stood reflecting the damaged world around it without a scratch from the traps and protections laid by the Sandaime. Pain examined it again, checking over the entire surface and the surrounding floor once more. He sent an experimental chakra surge through the crystal, receiving the same reaction as earlier. Stepping back, he began the first hand sign sequence that he thought might open the portal. The chakra balance was critical when dealing with the mirror. Such a large crystal required a great deal of chakra channeled through it for activation, but couldn't take any variation in the power level at risk of shattering the glass, meaning the user must exercise utmost control and a precise sequence of signs. The crystal flashed and hummed with vibration, but the light died almost as soon as it appeared and returned to its blank-faced dormant state. Pain tried a second possible sequence of hand signs, then a third, and a fourth. The flashes of light grew brighter and longer, the vibrations hummed through the silent room. On the fourth attempt he thought he saw shadows moving in the glass that didn't exist in his room. Thinking carefully, Pain considered each sign, its position, the sign preceding it, and the sign following it. This time he attempted to look at the combination with fresh eyes, assuming nothing from the earlier attempts, taking nothing for granted. Questioning his own logic at each step, Pain narrowed the problems down. Eventually, he was fairly confident that the most likely issue was with the last two signs. He changed them to a more stable combination and ran through the symbols again. This time, the mirror flashed, as though it were catching the glint of the sun. When the light faded, traveling down to the very bottom of the mirror and disappearing altogether, he found himself staring into a similar room in the tower's lower levels, but at the same time a room which was entirely different. The reflected room was clean and whole, containing an Anbu guard that faced the mirror with katana drawn. "Who are you?" the Anbu demanded, stance ready for anything. Pain didn't bother answering. Instead, he drew out a scroll and began a more accurate chakra diagram of the activated looking glass. When finished, he stepped up closer to the glass and rested a finger against it. Probing, he sent a low stream of chakra into the glass and observed the reaction. The looking glass was solid, like a closed window. The barrier that prevented crossing between the two worlds consisted of both chakra and the physical material that made up the crystal. To send something over or bring something through it, he would need to negate both barriers. Satisfied, Pain stepped back and ran through the hand signs to deactivate the mirror. It took 2 attempts, as he needed to slightly adjust his initial patterns, but now he had a much clearer understanding of how the mirror worked. Pain turned from the mirror, scroll in hand. He had more work to do. Minato surveyed the young shinobi before him. Uchiha Itachi was one of the very few active duty members left in his clan. An internal dispute within the Uchiha clan several years ago had culminated into what could only be described as civil war. Tensions between the clan and the village that ran back as far as the time of the Shodai Hokage sparked an internal divide amongst the Uchiha as to whether they should remain with the village or separate. In the end, the question of secession turned family members against one another as the proud clan refused to publicize their internal dispute to the rest of the village and sought to resolve the issue without aid. It was one of the greatest regrets of Minato's tenure as Hokage and also the main reason he began experimenting with the Sandaime's seeing glass. The shock of being woken in the middle of the night to find the members of one of Konoha's oldest clans slaughtering each other over an undecided future was almost as bad as facing a loose Kyuubi. It took all the Anbu in the village as well as himself and many jounin to finally stop the violence. In the end, many of the Uchiha shinobi died or were injured too gravely to continue their ninja careers. Of those Uchiha who remained, more supported the village than not, much like the young Itachi, and were eventually allowed to return to active duty in a limited capacity. It had been difficult to convince the majority of the village that the remaining Uchiha were trustworthy, but after a long and careful PR campaign through the joint efforts of Minato and Uchiha Shursui, the clan gained guarded acceptance and members were finally beginning to return to the Konoha shinobi ranks. It was in part due to Shursui's recommendation that Itachi was standing before Minato now. Shursui hoped that when others saw the Hokage assign Uchiha important missions again it would help affirm the clan's trustworthiness. Minato too hoped that by putting Itachi in this role he would show both the villagers and the diminished clan that the Uchiha were still a valued and important asset to Konoha. "I'm sure you heard the recent rumors concerning my son," Minato began after a brief moment. Itachi remained impassive. "Hi, Hokage-sama. As you've been informed, my son's existence and presence in the village is a confidential matter. The longer it takes for word to get out about my son the better." Minato hesitated. He knew if he was going to have the young shinobi help guard Naruto, then Itachi would have to know the truth about the dangers he could potentially face. Itachi had proven his loyalty to the village time and time again, most notably when forced to choose between his own parents and the safety of the village. Minato had no doubts about his loyalty, but still revealing Naruto's status as a Jinchuriki made him uncomfortable. "There is also something else. This is an SS class secret. I know you understand what that means. Naruto is the Kyuubi Jinchuriki." Itachi's only noticeable reaction was a slight widening of the eyes, but Minato could tell the man was listening to every word he said and the gravity of the revelation was not lost on him. "Naruto himself is not aware of this fact, and it will be kept from him until I determine the time is right to tell him. That fact is also part of the reason I decided to add you to the protection detail. It is a possibility that he may lose control of the Kyuubi's chakra. The Sharingan is known for being able to suppress and control the Bijou. If a situation occurs you, in particular, may be able to restrain the Kyuubi's chakra." Minato silently prayed that this would not be required, but for the protection of everyone involved they needed as many safeguards as possible. "Is that how you hurt your hands, Hokage-sama?" Itachi inquired. The young shinobi didn't generally ask questions, but when he did they were direct and straight to the point. Minato watched Itachi for a moment. It was a balancing act, knowing just how much information to entrust to others while trying to maintain a maximum level of security. Minato nodded once. "Yes, I was injured by the Kyuubi's chakra. Much of the Kyuubi's chakra dispersed when it was briefly released 8 years ago. That chakra has been recentering around my son as he is the largest concentration of it, and is thereby acting as a focal point. The situation has been remedied for the time being. We're keeping him inside a safe zone, warded from any latent chakra by a seal I designed. You'll also be issued chakra suppressants to carry on you at all times in case those seals fail. Hatake, Kakashi, and Noira Rin are currently assigned to the same mission and also carry chakra suppressants with them." Itachi nodded in understanding. "What are the limits of the safe zone?" "I've placed the seal along the walls of my home. Naruto should be safe from the Kyuubi's dispersed chakra while he remains inside, however until I find a better solution he cannot the building, especially for long periods of time." Minato didn't know how long it would take for Naruto to feel the effects if he left the house. It had been several days before they became noticeable the first time, but that could have been due to Minato's own unfamiliarity with the situation. Naruto had suffered nightmares every night before the seals were put in place, after all. Minato's thoughts wandered to Jiraiya, still unconscious and under Tsunade's care. His sensei was an expert in espionage and covert operations. Minato seriously doubted Jiraiya would let anyone gain knowledge they should not have, especially concerning Naruto, but they still didn't know what had happened to him and needed to take precautions. There may also be the possibility of other villages making an attempt to secure Naruto for the Kyuubi. "I doubt I need to emphasize for you the importance of this mission," Minato said, his expression deadly serious. "You must be prepared for danger, either from your ward or for actions your ward, at all times." "I understand, Hokage-sama," Itachi said. His face was devoid of emotion, but determination burned in his eyes. Between rebuilding the clan's trust, protecting the village and the remnants of his family, Minato knew Itachi bore a heavy burden on his shoulders and he would do whatever was necessary to fulfill his duty. Satisfied, Minato nodded. He reached into his desk and pulled out a sealed scroll. "Give this to Kakashi when you get to the house. Oh, and be careful of booby traps. Naruto has a fondness for setting them in inconvenient places." Itachi didn't react and Minato tried to imagine how the serious young ninja would react to opening a cabinet door and getting a face full of confetti, but failed. He handed the scroll over just as an urgent knock came to the door. Forming a few hand signs, he released the security seals around the door. "Come in." The Anbu captain set to guard the looking glass was already halfway into the room. Minato's eyes narrowed, his shoulders tensing. He nodded to Itachi. "Thank you, you're dismissed." The Uchiha nodded, bowed, and moved out the door, eyes only glancing at the Anbu as the guard hurried through a bow. "Hokage-sama, there's been an incident." Kakashi didn't know how long he had been unconscious. When he came to, he was stiff, sore, in pain, and still exhausted. He was alive though, and as long as he was alive he could still do something to fix the situation. The problem was what? Shifting slightly to get into a more comfortable position, Kakashi considered his situation and his options. He was behind enemy lines, by a fair distance considering how close the Hokage Tower had been the last time he saw it. There was a dead enemy soldier not too far away which could potentially tip off his presence and lead to his discovery. He was alone and injured with no realistic hope for rescue. Undoubtedly, by now the Hokage was aware of what had happened with the spy and that he hadn't returned from his pursuit of the message. Kakashi was sure that the others would assume he had failed, had most likely been killed, and that the information in the diversionary scroll had been secured by the enemy. Kakashi wasn't sure what the direct consequences of the information leak would be. The information in the scroll had been altered from the original for an occasion just like this. However, like the Hokage said, there were enough elements of truth to still be dangerous, especially if the enemy had another source of information to reference. Their end goal was to capture Naruto. The war effort as a whole wasn't in immediate danger, the operation could even be considered a success since they had captured the spy, but Naruto certainly was in danger. So what could Kakashi do? No matter what he chose, Kakashi knew he would need to rest first, so immediate action was out of the question. Moving painfully, he pulled out an emergency ration from his pouch and crunched down on it, determined to regain as much strength as he could. Even with the sleep he'd just gotten, Kakashi was dangerously close to chakra exhaustion. Days of fighting at the start of the invasion and the last several days rooting out the spy left little time to rest and rebuild his strength. His reserves were dangerously low and left him short on both physical strength and chakra. Lying still again, he ran through each possible course of action he could take. The first option Kakashi thought of was returning to his own lines. He could make his way back, report to the Hokage so the old man would know exactly what had happened and take measures to counter it instead of acting upon assumptions and guesswork. By doing so, Kakashi would be able to get medical help, rest, and eventually rejoin the fighting. However, it would also mean leaving the enemy free to pursue Naruto. The second option was less practical, more dangerous, and less likely to succeed. Knowing the probable motivation of the enemy, Kakashi was sure he could find another way to stop them from reaching Naruto. Gaining the information to reach the boy was only the first step in the process. Even if Kakashi had failed to prevent the enemy from gaining the information, the ultimate goal of the operation had been to capture the spy and protect Naruto. They had captured the spy, now he just needed to ensure that Naruto was safe by disrupting any of the other steps the enemy needed to take in getting to Naruto. If Kakashi decided to follow that second option, it meant he would need to remain behind enemy lines, even go further into enemy territory and sneak into the enemy-held and fortified Hokage Tower. It would mean delaying much-needed medical attention, rest, and probably end with his death. However, if he succeeded, Naruto would be safe. Steeling himself for the challenges ahead, Kakashi crunched down on another emergency ration. He wriggled his canteen up and took a few sips and debated the merit and dangers of attempting a nap. He only one way which was certain to keep the enemy from getting to Naruto, and it would take all that he had to accomplish it. If he destroyed the gateway, then no one would be able to reach Naruto. Granted, it would mean no foreseeable way to bring the boy back to their side, but if it kept Naruto safe, then there might not be any better option. When he was ready and prepared, he would set out again, this time to destroy the Hokage's looking glass. Chapter 15, Determination. And he hasn't returned? Sarutobi confirmed, clamping his jaw down on his pipe. Of course Kakashi hadn't returned. If he had, then he would be reporting himself rather than Shikaku, who was standing before the Hokage with worried expression. How long ago did he start his chase? Over 12 hours ago. He may have crossed over to enemy territory during his pursuit, in which case he most likely is in need of assistance. If he is even still alive, Sarutobi said, voicing what Shikaku hadn't. They all knew it was a possibility, but losing Kakashi would be a heavy blow against their fighting forces and morale. Many of the younger ninja in the village looked up to Kakashi. Few knew him on a truly personal level, but all knew and respected his reputation, and all of the upper-level ninja trusted his skills and judgment. Kakashi is extremely resourceful, Shikaku said, but they both were familiar with the reality of war. Sometimes resourcefulness just wasn't enough. Assemble several long-range surveillance experts, Sarutobi said, glaring down at the battle map of Konoha, specifically at the lines separating the Konoha and Ame forces. I want them positioned along the most likely routes Kakashi took and where the information would be brought. The Hokage Tower seems to be their current headquarters. The Hokage nodded in agreement. Have a team ready should the surveillance pick up any indication he's still alive or needs help. Shikaka looked down at the map, studying the fronts and controlled areas in the village. Asuma has successfully retaken the main and northwestern gate from the Iwa forces. It has limited the area they control inside the city and weakened their other positions. We could draw a team from there and redirect it toward the rescue effort. Be sure they get some rest if at all possible, Sarutobi said. Alert me if there is any movement or changes inside the Ame-controlled territory. Hi, Hokage-sama. Shikaka bowed and left the room, another wave of shinobi bearing reports rushing through the door as he left. Sarutobi received the news from the front lines, allowing it to pile up on his desk. They were beginning to turn the battle around, regaining lost ground and pushing some of the enemy forces back. The fight was far from over, but now he had a glimmer of hope that he would not be the last Hokage of Konoha. Looking down at the map before him, his eyes caught the area where Kakashi was last seen. He didn't believe the copy Nin was dead. Call it gut intuition or simple wishful thinking, but he believed Kakashi was too skilled to allow himself to be killed in such a simple manner. That meant Kakashi was alive out there and either couldn't return or had decided against it. Where are you? What are you doing? Sarutobi couldn't help but wonder before shaking his head and returning back to the stack of reports. Kakashi didn't know how long he slept. It had been dark when he first started chasing the paper, but the sun was out when he finally woke, though it was muted by dust and smoke in the air. His throat was parched and his limbs had stiffened during the prolonged period of inactivity. The one good thing he could say about his condition was that he didn't feel quite as exhausted anymore. He hadn't meant to sleep long, but if it gave him a little extra energy then it was well worth it. Grimacing at himself, Kakashi pulled out a soldier pill. He'd been relying on them too much in the past week. It wasn't healthy to take so many in such a short time, but he didn't have much of a choice. He needed as much strength as possible. Besides, the odds of him getting to the mirror and destroying it were unlikely. The odds of getting out and back to friendly lines again after the fact were astronomically dim. Getting out didn't matter so much as blocking the enemy's chance at obtaining Naruto. It was, potentially, his last chance to protect his sensei's son, his comrades, and the village, since the enemy would undoubtedly use the Kyuubi as a weapon. Wriggling another sip of water, and only vaguely noting the small amount left in his canteen, Kakashi took a breath and pushed himself toward the edge of his hideaway. Moving hurt. It hurt a lot. For a few minutes, it took more effort than Kakashi liked until the soldier pill kicked in and dulled some of the pain. Then, the artificial energy took effect, buzzing through his limbs and pushing him the rest of the way into the open. The sky was dimming, though it looked like there were still another few hours of muted sunlight before night truly fell. The half-light would help hide his movement as Kakashi made his way to the tower. The distance wasn't far, but remaining undetected was vital. He wasn't in a condition to get into any more altercations with the enemy. He could really only afford one more fight, and that would have to be quick, ideally ending with the Hokage's looking glass shattered into 1,000 unfixable pieces. Kakashi moved through the rubble with slow caution, everything he had ever learned about stealth running through his mind. He didn't know how long he had before the enemy made their move, but hurrying into the situation thoughtlessly would likely get him killed. Crouched low, Kakashi dodged a group of Nin. It wasn't difficult. They sat in a circle around a small cooking fire propped against slabs of fallen-off building in the street. One snored with his head tilted back and mouth hanging open, a red-stained bandage wrapped around his forehead. The other three didn't look much more awake, injuries visible in the dirty white bandages tied around various limbs and heads bent low between slumped shoulders. The drawn-out battle was wearing on both sides of the fight, Kakashi reflected as he moved past. He had to admit to himself, one advantage to being so far behind enemy lines was they never expected to find a Konoha Nin, and therefore they never looked for one. The thought was a small comfort to him as he approached the shattered entrance to the Hokage Tower. At this point, surprise was the only thing he had going for himself. Pain unrolled the seal for Conan as she stepped closer, checking his detailed work with a practiced eye. The kunoichi wasn't as skilled with Fuinjutsu as he was, and he wasn't at the level he knew their sensei had achieved, but he never kept anything from Conan, and a second pair of eyes always helped. "This is the seal you designed," Conan said, more of a statement than a question. Her eyes scanned over the wide sheet of paper. It took up a large portion of the room, spread out on the floor and crinkled along the walls where the furniture was pushed back. Pain looked over his own work, eyes scanning for errors, trying to think through the possible unexpected outcomes of the untried seal. "It's not the original the Hokage devised. I was not able to reconstruct his seal, even with the sources at my disposal, but in theory it should work. The original seal was hinted at in the information sent by their spy, but there was no complete example. He believed the partial seal he found in the destroyed scroll was a prototype of the seal, but had no way to know the completed version. The seal laid out before them was based on the partial seal, but largely Pain's own creation. Pain was certain that the original had been simpler, less circuitous, but he was unable to afford the time to refine it any farther. You tipped your hand when you opened the portal the first time. The Hokage in that world will be on his guard, set up defenses. Conan cautioned as she stepped around the seal, touching parts of it as she examined specific portions. Pain nodded, just a tip of his head in acknowledgement. It was necessary to get the information needed for the seal. Conan was right though, it would make the next step in the plan that much more difficult. It would be like storming a fortress's front gate rather than sneaking in through the back door. We will need a way to bypass any defenses they put in place. We know our opponent is the Yondaime. His specialties are Fuinjustu and speed. He'll have the area sealed with a containment barrier, Conan said, as well as guards. There are already Anbu guards. Pain agreed. The guards would not be a problem, more of an inconvenience. The barrier would be more of an obstacle. He frowned at the seal, mulling over the problem. It wasn't the first time the obstacles on the other side of the mirror had occurred to him. He could use the Nintendo Path Asterisk to discover the way to open the barrier from the guards. One of them would have to know. If that did not work, he could use the Gakuto Path Asterisk to weaken the barrier, absorbing the chakra that fueled it. Then we'll have to locate the Kyuubi, capture it, and return through the mirror, Conan said as she returned to the Pain's side. Who are you going to send through for this? Nintendo and Gakuto will get through any barriers placed by the Yondaime. Chikashoto **** can create a diversion during the search for the Kyuubi. I would like you to go as well. Gakuto will stay behind and protect the mirror while you and Nintendo find and retrieve the Kyuubi. Pain bent down and began carefully folding the seal. You will be risking half your paths should anything go wrong. Conan moved around to the other side to help fold the large seal, mindful of places where chakra paper had to be attached to accommodate the large size. We should send additional men as well. Their presence could increase the confusion within that Konoha as well as our chances of successfully retrieving the Kyuubi and returning. Pain paused in folding the seal. He looked up at his longtime friend across the room. Conan stared at him with the neutral expression that she had adopted since Yahiko's death and the disastrous event of Hanzo's treachery. Her eyes, though, reflected the concern she held for him. He knew she followed him for his sake, more than dedication to the cause to why he had dedicated himself. If he decided to give it up and abandon the course they had set, then she would follow him without hesitation. If anything were to happen to her, he wouldn't be able to bear it. Sending extra men, though they likely wouldn't help or even make it back to their original world, could increase Conan's chances of remaining safe as well as retrieving the Kyuubi. He could replace any bodies he lost along the way, but Conan, his last friend, was too precious to risk needlessly. Very well, he said, returning to the half-folded seal. Jiraiya gasped, waking to a world of pain and an intense moment of panic. He couldn't remember where he was for an instant, what had happened or was happening. All he could remember was the intense need to get away, to get back to Konoha. He needed to warn Minato. Jiraiya! That was Tsunade's voice, sounding tired, relieved, and worried all at once. What? Jiraiya fought against the blinding light assaulting his eyes. Bits of memory were floating back, but they were disjointed and didn't make sense to him. Don't worry, you're safe. I'll get you something for the pain, Tsunade reassured him. Her voice moved away from the bed. You were injured on a surveillance mission to Amegakure. Just like that, everything snapped back into place, like a lock with all the tumblers falling into their proper positions. He tried to sit up, but fell back to the bed, gritting his teeth against the groan. The pain was worse than the time when Tsunade had beaten him half to death. He gripped the bed, determined to try again. Stop moving, Tsunade snapped, next to him again. You're going to injure yourself even more, you damn idiot. Jiraiya shook his head. He had to warn Minato. Yahiko. Nagato. Pain. Jiraiya still didn't understand all of it, but he did know one thing. His former student had become a monster and more dangerous than he ever thought imaginable. There's more than one. He gasped out, fighting for breath in a room that seemed to hold too little oxygen. I said hold still. Tsunade growled, then continued loudly to herself. Fucking idiot, going off and almost getting himself killed, doesn't know when to quit. Jiraiya managed to get his eyes open in time to see Tsunade sliding a needle into N4 in his arm. Warn Minato! Jiraiya gasped, near desperation. There's more than one of him. He knew he wasn't making a lot of sense, but couldn't make the words come out right, couldn't put all his thoughts in the right order. "I'll tell him," Tsunade said. Her voice sounded farther away, the pain felt farther away, too. "You just rest a few more hours. The world won't end in that time." Jiraiya's last conscious thought was that he hoped she was right. Naruto glanced sidelong at the new guard staying in the house. Kakashi and Rin seemed more like family, a brother and a sister rather than babysitters or guards, so it was easy to have them there. But the new guy, Itachi, was clearly there for one reason: duty. It was Itachi's job to be there, his mission to make sure that everything was safe and secure, and he wasn't concerned with anything else, much less having fun. Itachi was so serious and a little intimidating. Besides the jerk in his class, Sasuke, Naruto had never really met an Uchiha before, and now they were all gone in the other Konoha. Naruto didn't quite know how to react to the man now guarding him. Looking down at the open book set across his lap, Naruto tried to ignore the shinobi's presence in the room. Instead, he flipped the page and took in the pictures splayed out in front of him for probably the 10th time that day. It was a photo album that Minato had given to him just before leaving for some work thing. Naruto had been too taken with the new gift to really listen. When his dad had given him the album, it had originally been empty, but Minato also handed over the box of photos they looked through the other day, saying that Naruto could choose which pictures to fill the album, so long as he was careful. Naruto spent the rest of the morning combing through pictures. Some of them he had seen before when Minato first pulled out the box, but many were new and all of them had his mother in them. He couldn't remember being so careful and meticulous with anything in his entire life. He checked each picture against the other, tried to find the happiest, funniest photos he could before sliding them into the clear sleeves inside the book. Now, Naruto was just checking, once again, if all the pictures fit, in case there was one he wanted to swap out from the box before giving the extra photos to Itachi-san to be put away. Movement from the other side of the room drew Naruto's head up to his guard once again. Itachi had moved from his position at the table to the window, and was staring out across the lawn with a faint frown across his face. The Uchiha's eyes narrowed slightly and turned red as Naruto's own widened. Naruto shifted around to better see Itachi's face, then finally got up from his seat and moved next to his guard. He looked at Itachi's intense red eyes, then out the window and back. Naruto couldn't see anything remarkable enough to stare at across the expanse of grass, trees, and bordering wall. "What's wrong with your eyes?" Naruto finally asked, giving up on trying to find what was so interesting in the yard and focusing on the far more interesting set of red eyes next to him. Itachi's gaze cut away from the window and honed in on Naruto. His eyes faded back to their original dark hue and his expression passed from intense concentration to calm indifference. He regarded Naruto a moment before speaking. "There's nothing wrong with my eyes, Naruto-kun. It's an ability unique to my clan." Naruto's eyebrows shot up in interest. "Like a ninja technique? Is it really cool? What does it do?" Itachi turned from the window and moved back toward the table and the scroll he had been reading. "It's an eye technique, but more like a physical ability than the standard ninjutsu you learn in the academy." He paused, sitting down at the table and taking up the scroll again, but looking at Naruto as he said, "Simply put, it allows me to see and understand." Naruto frowned, glancing back out the window across the grounds. It looked still and quiet, a silent breeze moving the tree branches beyond the pane. "I don't see anything." He looked back to Itachi. Itachi's eyes moved to the window, looking past Naruto as the faintest frown returned to his face. "No," he agreed after a moment, turning his gaze down to the scroll. Naruto frowned in confusion. He looked from Itachi to the window a few more times, before shrugging and moving back to the couch. Halfway across the room he stopped as a shudder ran through him. A moment later, he could hear the front door snap closed, and the unsettling sensation was gone. Shaking his head, he glanced back at Itachi only to find the shinobi staring at him. The dark eyes cut away as soon as Naruto caught them and Itachi rose from his chair. He moved toward the sitting room door and swung it open just as Kakashi's voice came through. "I'm back." Kakashi appeared in the open door. He nodded to Itachi before strolling over to Naruto still seated on the couch. Kakashi dropped a bag down next to Naruto, saying, "You can add these to your collection." Naruto craned his neck, opening up the shopping bag. Inside was another album, still covered in plastic wrap and sporting a price tag. With it was a large envelope. He pulled out the envelope and looked inside to find more photographs, including not just Naruto's mother, but his father, Kakashi, Rin, and even the old pervert, Jiraiya. Having those pictures, even if he hadn't been there for the moments captured on film, was the sort of thing real families had. "Thank you, Kakashi-Nizen!" Naruto cried, launching himself forward to hug Kakashi around the man's waist. "Ma," the one-eyed shinobi said. "It was Rin's idea first and there aren't any of you yet, we'll have to get a camera." He gently shook off Naruto, patting him absently on his head. Besides, if it keeps you busy from other things, then I'm all for it. Naruto laughed. Don't worry. I'm gonna get Itachi-san next. You're safe until then. You should take that threat seriously, Itachi-san, Kakashi said, glancing back at the other man. Itachi nodded. I'll keep an eye out, he said with all the seriousness of the world. He glanced from the window to the door before shifting his eyes back to Kakashi. Could I have a word, Kakashi-san? Kakashi looked at Itachi and Naruto looked between the two men. They were doing that thing that adults did when they wanted to talk about something without a kid around. Of course, Kakashi said, moving to the door. Itachi followed, closing the sitting room door firmly behind him. Naruto watched them go from the room, curiosity eating away at him when the door shut. Ever since his talk with Minato, and especially since learning that Minato was his father, and he was wanted and had a home, Naruto was deliberately trying to be good. A part of him still didn't want to give the people in the new Konoha a reason to send him back to the old Konoha. He also wanted to make his father proud. However, the lure to peek in on a conversation between the two shinobi was too great to resist. Setting down the envelope, Naruto crept to the door and eased it open till he could peer through with one eye. Kakashi and Itachi were standing out in the entrance hall. They spoke in low tones that failed to carry words back to Naruto's position, but the boy could tell from their expressions it was something serious. Then, Kakashi lifted his hitate, revealing his other eye, and moved to the window. Naruto frowned as he watched the two men gazing out the front window. The low tones coming from the hall meant they were still talking, but no more comprehensible from Naruto's position than a moment before as he strained to hear. Itachi gestured to the door, and then to the seal painted on it, and Kakashi settled into a considering pose. The silver-haired ninja then said something and disappeared up the stairs. Itachi turned back to the sitting room. Naruto didn't bother dodging back inside as the Uchiha's gaze fell upon him. He moved to the side as Itachi came back into the room and sat back down at the table. What did you see? He asked, looking back to the window overlooking the yard. It looked just as normal outside as it had moments ago. Nothing, Itachi said, pulling open his reading. The door swung open and Kakashi reappeared, carrying a small can of paint and brush. He turned around and began painting the same symbol lining the outer walls on the door to the sitting room. Naruto frowned at him, opening his mouth to ask another question. Kakashi cut him off before he could get a word out though. I'm sure Minato-sensei would love to see the second album when he gets home from his duties. You better get started on it, Naruto-kun, if you want to finish in time. Naruto huffed, turning back to the couch and the abandoned albums and pictures. He sat down and pulled the new photo book Kakashi brought into his lap but paused before doing anything else. He watched Kakashi draw the seal on the door and then move a few feet along the wall before starting it in a new place. Naruto's eyes slid to the neat line of seals already marked on the outer wall, and then to the window and the yard beyond. He still couldn't see anything more than a bright summer day that he wasn't allowed outside to enjoy, but there was something else too. The small shudder that ran through Naruto this time had nothing to do with the front door opening. The tower was a wreck. Creeping through the halls, Kakashi cringed to think how many repairs they would have to make to get the building back to its former state, if that was even possible. Then there were the stark reminders of the fierce battle over the important landmark. Blood smears dotted the walls and floors in thick splotches, black from time and dust, some undoubtedly from Konoha ninjas defending the halls with their lives before finally being ordered out and falling back. Kakashi moved from shadow to shadow, straining every sense and analyzing every disturbance. Moving through the building was much more difficult than the grounds outside. There were more people in here and there was less room to dodge out of view. He thought about using a transformation jutsu, but couldn't afford wasting the chakra. He'd taken another soldier pill once inside the building, fully expecting to eventually get into a fight at some point inside the tower. His luck had held so far though, and he was close to the target. Slipping into the staircase leading to the lowest levels, Kakashi increased his speed. The longer he stayed in the hallways, the more of a chance there was for discovery. He had visited the lowest levels many times for his Anbu duties. The rooms were designed based on the classification of their contents. The farther along the corridor, the more sensitive and dangerous the information got, giving guards a little more time to react should anyone attempt to infiltrate and steal anything. There were also safeguards to keep unauthorized individuals out of the increasingly restricted sections of the hall, making it difficult to progress the farther a person went if they didn't have access or an escort. Following that logic, Kakashi guessed he would find the looking glass in one of the last rooms of the hall, where the highest security sections were located. Moving along, he could tell that the various protective seals had been deactivated, but that was to be expected. He wasn't sure if he hoped the looking glass's room was still sealed or not. The Sandaime said that the enemy had mostly likely found the looking glass, but that was just a speculation. Everything pointed to the room already being opened, but Kakashi quickly ran a scenario through his mind on what he would do if the looking glass wasn't compromised yet. He could either leave or break into the room and destroy it anyway. A strong part of him said to destroy it either way, but he put the final decision off till he knew for certain. Coming to the end of the hall, Kakashi was glad he didn't waste the effort worrying about the room not being opened. He could see the large hole in the wall from a long way down the corridor. There was a light, too, and voices. The light spilling from the hole created two long shadows down either side of the corridor, which Kakashi used to draw closer. The voices were low and almost indistinguishable. Kakashi would have only been able to pick out a few words in the best of circumstances, but it was not the best circumstances and Kakashi couldn't make out anything. Kakashi crept to the door, staying in the dark corners and smothering any chakra that might be picked up by the occupants of the room. The effort taxed his already exhausted frame, and he was glad he took one more soldier pill before slipping into the tower. It filled his limbs with jittery energy that wasn't healthy in the long term, but if Kakashi was honest with himself, he knew long-term health was not something he needed to worry about at this point in time. In an initial sweep, Kakashi counted at least 8 Jounin-level shinobi in the room. 5 of them wore black cloaks with red and white clouds across them. He'd heard some intel concerning a rising criminal organization with cloaks matching that same description. However, the information they'd received was vague and largely unconfirmed. The only thing Kakashi knew for certain was that the members were extremely dangerous, high-leveled shinobi. And there were 5 of them in that room. For a moment, Kakashi felt torn. This was vital information for the village. He didn't know why the black-cloaked figures hadn't participated in the fighting yet, but he did know that if they got actively involved in the battle, the exhausted Konoha forces would not be able to stand against them. The Hokage would need to know that the enemy forces had high-ranking shinobi that had yet to even enter the battle, but that very same fact gave Kakashi pause. Why hadn't they helped in the fighting? Kakashi thought back to the Hokage's theory on the reasoning behind the invasion: to diminish Konoha's military strength and to capture the Kyuubi. Konoha's military was already deeply damaged by the invasion. Even if the village managed to push out the invaders sooner than expected, they would still be recovering for years to come. The loss of men, materials, and facilities was a devastating blow for the hidden village. In every respect, that first goal was already achieved. The only thing left was securing the Kyuubi, and here were possibly the highest level shinobi the enemy had about to embark on a mission to do precisely that. If that was really the case, and everything did point to it, then the best way for Kakashi to derail the enemy's plans was still to destroy the mirror. Considering the 8 obstacles between Kakashi and his goal, it was a task easier said than done. On the other side of the room, Kakashi could see the mirror, a black polished chakra crystal reflecting the torches around the room. A flash swept across the mirror and the dark surface disappeared, replaced by the image of a similar room glowing with its own light. He couldn't make out any more of the other side of the glass, but it didn't matter. He was more concerned with what was happening on his side of the mirror. The Ainin had spread out a seal drawn on large pieces of chakra paper stuck together. It covered the floor in front of the mirror, draped over rubble from the damaged walls and door. The 3 shinobi dressed in standard Jounin uniforms stood off to the side while the 5 black-cloaked figures were gathered around the glass itself. One of them was crouched before the glass circled by the others. From his position, Kakashi guessed that he had activated the mirror. The situation was worse than Kakashi had thought. Clearly, the enemy had already determined how to activate the mirror. Looking down at the seal, he wondered if they were attempting to transport troops through the mirror. From what he could see, the seal spread out on the floor was different from the one devised by the Hokage, but that didn't mean it wouldn't work. There was more than one way to skin a cat, or perform a technique in this case. The seal began to glow. The glow spread over the seal and to the mirror, making the looking glass glow with additional light, and Kakashi knew his time was running out. His gut told him the shinobi gathered in that room were preparing to go after Naruto. Beyond the looking glass itself, he didn't know if any other barriers stood between Naruto and his pursuers. He thought he could hear voices from the other side of the mirror, but they were too low to make out and his view of the other world too obscured to see what was happening on that side. Kakashi silently checked his few supplies in his hip pack. There was a smoke bomb, several explosive tags, and a few shuriken, hardly the size of arsenal he'd want when taking on 8 jounin on his own. He was running through the possible plans of assault he could take when his one advantage was suddenly stripped away from him in an instant. A force, Kakashi couldn't describe what exactly, grabbed at him, pulling him toward the room and away from his cover. He barely had time to substitute himself with a shadow clone, allowing the clone to be dragged out into the midst of the group. The clone managed to grab one of the sides to the broken doorway, clinging on as the force pulled its feet off the ground. Kakashi knew the clone wouldn't last long given his current chakra levels. His surprise was ruined and he had to act quickly if he still wanted to salvage the situation. Apparently, the enemy had similar constraints for time because the figure kneeling on the ground spoke. "Go through," he commanded. "There is not much time before the alarm sounds, if it hasn't been sounded already. I'll take care of the one here." Kakashi grabbed the smoke bomb from his pack, eyes fixed on the events in the room from his position. His clone still held on to the broken doorway, grunting with the exertion it took. The other figures turned back to the looking glass and moved forward. One of the red-headed figures entered the mirror first. He pushed against the surface and, after a moment, sank through to the other side. Kakashi heard shouts coming from the mirror, probably from a guard stationed on the other side by that world, but they were muffled and not his concern at the moment. The other figures followed quickly, pushing through the barrier, two of the black-robed figures first, then the Jounin, and finally the blue-haired woman. Urgency clawed at Kakashi as one by one he watched them pass through the glass. He pulled out one of the kunai left, and prepared for his entrance. The clone was slipping and that would be the end of his deception. Just as the clone lost its grip, Kakashi leapt out from his hiding place throwing the smoke bomb down in the room. Thick, black smoke billowed out masking Kakashi's entrance. The advantage only lasted for a moment when that unknown force pushed the smoke back to the edges of the room, creating a circular cleared area around the black-robed figure. Kakashi's eyes narrowed as he noticed the force wasn't as strong as when he'd nearly been pulled out of his cover. Kakashi searched for the reason why. It could be a possible weakness he could exploit. In a flash of insight, Kakashi spotted it. Not 5 feet from the man was the looking glass. He didn't want to damage the device or risk breaking the connection with his unknown jutsu. The man hadn't even moved from his position crouched in front of the mirror, hands still up in the Hitsuji sign. He had to focus on both the mirror and Kakashi at the same time. Through the mirror, Kakashi could hear sounds of another battle playing out, but he had no time to look. When the smoke disappeared, he immediately jumped back into the remnants clinging to the edges of the room. He had barely landed and made his observations when he moved again. He darted toward the mirror, throwing his kunai at the man and pulling out a second. 2 kunai left in his pouch. Kakashi threw the second kunai just as the man pushed away his first. The man caught the second kunai, still not moving from his position and leaving one hand in the ram symbol. The movement wasn't lost on Kakashi. Perhaps the man had a recovery time after using his power? There wasn't any time to dwell on the matter though. As soon as the man caught the kunai, he pointed it at Kakashi again and it shot forward. Kakashi dodged to the side. Intending to take advantage of a possible recovery time his opponent had, he leapt toward the mirror, charging a hand with Chidori. He would cut right through the center of the mirror and hope the defending forces on the other side could handle the shinobi that had already slipped through. However, either he was mistaken about the recovery time, or it was too short a period to take advantage of, because Kakashi didn't make it halfway to the looking glass before he was ripped off his feet and dragged toward the man. He barely had time to turn and look before intense pain sliced through him. Partly from reaction and partly as a counterattack, Kakashi struck out with his Chidori already waiting in his hand. He cut up through whatever had impaled him and into his opponent's shoulder. Kakashi stumbled back, struggling to breathe and stay upright on his feet. He glanced down, noticing with an unnerving disassociation the thick metal rod sticking out of his middle. He couldn't think clearly enough to guess what damage it had done, what organs it had hit. He was having a hard time just keeping his vision from blacking out and the world from falling over. His back slammed into a wall, jolting him with pain and making him gasp. He desperately tried to use some leverage to push himself upright as he noticed the rage in the man's eyes before him. Kakashi dimly realized his opponent had strange, rippled eyes, something he hadn't seen from his previous positions. It was just his luck to choose an opponent with some new and powerful dojutsu. He groped for another kunai, struggling to keep balance. But he was falling backwards, something which shouldn't have been possible with the wall behind him. Any chance to reason it out was destroyed when Kakashi hit the floor, though. Pain racked through him from the impact as Kakashi struggled to take a breath. He choked, then fought to pull down his mask as he coughed out a mouthful of blood. Another came as he tried to keep his lungs clear enough to simply breathe. Around him, the sounds of an intense battle raged, but Kakashi could do nothing besides struggle to breathe and expel the fluids choking him. With every body-racking movement, his strength drained away, most of it from the soldier pills he'd taken earlier. Time slowed and took on a surreal, dreamlike quality that was difficult to cut through. Part of Kakashi thought he must have already fallen unconscious because the last thing he registered was Minato-sensei racing past him, and that was impossible. After all, Minato was long since dead. Chapter 16: The Invasion. Minato sat by Jiraiya's bedside, frowning down at the notes in his lap. Faint sounds of the hospital beyond floated in through the closed door. Initially, Jiraiya had been too unstable to move to the hospital, and when he was finally out of danger, Tsunade had him transferred to a private room at Konoha's General Hospital to better monitor his recovery. Though the danger was over, the Sannin would be weak for some time to come, confined to bed with orders to rest. Or else. Jiraiya had been sleeping deeply since Tsunade gave him the pain reliever the first time he woke, but according to the medical ninja he should be coming round again soon. Minato hoped he would be there for it, and then he could ask about Jiraiya's mysterious message. There's more than one of them. Minato noticed something stir from the bed. He sat up, sliding forward in his seat, eyes locked onto Jiraiya's face. Sensei? Jiraiya groaned, shifting under the sheets as his face scrunched. His eyes fluttered open, and he looked around the room half awake. Minato? I'm here, Minato said, pulling his chair closer and dropping his most recent project into his lap. He grabbed the cup of water from the nightstand as he caught Jiraiya's searching hand. Have some water. One hand behind Jiraiya's head, Minato helped his sensei take a few sips from the cup before placing the water back by the bed. Sake would be better, Jiraiya moaned, face scrunching again in discomfort. That's between you and Tsunade, Minato said, settling back into his chair. I'm just following the doctor's orders, and right now she's more of a threat than you. Fine, Jiraiya huffed. How long have I been out? Almost 2 days. Your lucky Rin was there when you appeared. She was able to start treatment immediately, shaved some time off your recovery, and probably saved your life. Minato thought about asking about the fight, but he didn't want to push his sensei too fast too soon. He could give the older man a few minutes to orientate himself, and wake up a little more. I'll have to thank her, Jiraiya said, closing his eyes a moment before opening them again and looking at Minato. He took a moment to focus, a worried frown covering his face. What happened to your hands? Minato looked down at his bandaged hands. His sleeves covered the true extent of the injuries, which was just fine with him. There was an incident, Minato said, looking down at the notes in his laps and shuffling them around. He glanced up and found Jiraiya staring at him. The latent chakra from the Kyuubi has been gravitating to Naruto, causing his nightmares, affecting his moods. One night it just became too much for him. And he lost control. Jiraiya finished, glaring up at the ceiling. I guess we should have seen that coming. The seal he has lets the Kyuubi's chakra leak out. It would only make sense it would also be a way for chakra to leak in, he grumbled, disgusted with his own oversight. Minato shrugged. Hindsight was 20/20. I've sealed off the house from the latent chakra. He should be safe for the time being. What did you learn in Amegakure? Minato put a restraining hand on Jiraiya's shoulder when the injured man tried to push himself up into a sitting position. It didn't take much effort to hold his sensei down. Jiraiya stopped struggling with a baleful glare at Minato. His white face and the beads of perspiration on his forehead betrayed him, though. The country itself is still trapped in civil war, though things seem to have fallen into a stalemate. Hanzo's dead, but a few of his generals were able to rally the last of their men in the eastern half of the country. The most worrying thing, though, is Pain. He is here, then? What did you mean, there's more than one of him? Is Pain the one you were talking about? Minato had to bite his tongue to keep any more questions from coming out in a rush. He'd been working on assumptions and half-clues ever since the entire thing had started. He was more than ready to get some real information with which he could work. Jiraiya held up both hands in a halting gesture, wincing as he brought one of them up to his head. Yes, he's here, and just as much of a mystery as the one we saw in the mirror. Stopping a moment, Jiraiya took in a steady breath and let it out again. Minato let his sensei collect his thoughts before continuing. You remember I said Nagato had the Rinnegan, but that it was Yahiko on the other side of the mirror? Minato nodded. That discrepancy had been one of the reasons underlying Jiraiya's misadventure. I ran into the same thing in Amegakure. Yahiko's face with Nagato's Rinnegan. It was Nagato, though. Despite what he looked like, I'm positive it was him. He called himself Pain, and he's the leader of the anti-Hanzo faction. Jiraiya shifted in his bed, eyes focused on the ceiling. Was he as powerful as you thought? Minato asked, needing to know what they would be going up against. His sensei nodded, grimacing at the memory. More powerful than I thought he would be. I had to use my sage mode to even stand a chance. There was more than one of him. A wave of dread washed through Minato. He gripped the arms on the chair a moment, feeling the still sharp sting from the burns cut into his palms. Jiraiya was beaten while he was using his senjutsu abilities, not just beaten but almost killed. Minato never expected to face an opponent as powerful as that, and with his hands still injured. What do you mean, more than one of him? Jiraiya shook his head, loose white hair flopping over his face. I don't know how, but he had more than one body. They weren't clones. They were different people, but they all had the red hair, piercings, and the rinnegan. I've never seen anything like it before. Minato ran a hand through his hair. He didn't like what he was hearing one bit. Did you notice any weaknesses? Anything we could take advantage of in a fight? Jiraiya rubbed his hands across his eyes. He was silent a moment, eyes closed and deep frown on his face. Their vision was linked, he said slowly as he sifted through his memory. They could see what the other was seeing, so when they fought together in close quarters there were almost no blind spots. Separating them out and conducting one-on-one or two-on-one battles would help mitigate that. They also only used one technique each, summoning technique, a chakra absorption technique, and a technique to attract or repel both physical objects and jutsu. Minato was silent a moment as he considered the intel. So you only saw 3 bodies? He asked. Jiraiya snorted. As if 3 of them weren't enough. They didn't seem affected by physical injury or pain, worked in perfect unison, and there's no way to tell if there are more bodies or not. He grunted in pain as he shifted to another position. Jiraiya glanced back to Minato, this time looking at the stack of paper and notebooks in Minato's lap. What's that? Jiraiya asked, gesturing to the papers in Minato's hands. Minato looked down at his latest project, half his thoughts still on the information concerning Amegakure and pain. It's a contingency plan, an emergency stop for the mirror. This seal should disrupt the chakra paths and immediately cut the connection. Minato picked up the papers, leafing through them as he slumped in his seat. He ran a hand over his face and let out a heavy sigh. Unfortunately, I don't know what that will do to the mirror itself. It might make the crystal inert, destroying any chance at contacting that other world again. Jiraiya's tired, half-lidded eyes watched him for a moment before voicing Minato's thoughts. And you can't decide if that's a good thing or a bad thing. No, Minato admitted, scrubbing at his head. His blonde hair stuck up at all ends when he pulled his hand away, messier than normal. We know the pain we saw in the mirror has a version of himself in the Amegakure of our own world. We know he's extremely dangerous and hostile. Minato gestured to Jiraiya's figure laid out on the bed. As demonstrated by yourself. We also know in that other world he was dangerous and determined enough to invade Konoha. Is he planning to do something similar in this world? The potential for intelligence with the mirror is as great as the danger it presents. At the moment, we know they can activate the mirror, but can they come through? From what we understood, only the Sandaime had that ability. That's no guarantee though. Minato fell silent, frowning down at the floor, elbows propped on the arms of the chair and hands clasped against his chin. He could see Jiraiya watching him in his periphery. His sensei didn't say anything, just watched with a sad expression as the Hokage struggled with his burdens of responsibility. I'm glad I opened the looking glass if for no other reason than I have Naruto now, but I've also put the village in grave danger. I'm still putting it in danger. Do I have the right to be so selfish? Eventually, Jiraiya reached out a shaky hand and laid it on Minato's knee. Minato-chan, he said, making Minato look up at him. Minato's thoughts flashed to a time when he was still a child, just out of the academy with no concept of the challenges and heartbreak that he would face. Then, the moment was gone and he was back in his seat, looking at his sensei lying injured and bedridden, feeling tired, worried, and old. You had no way to know this would happen, and now that you're in the situation, you're doing the best you can. That's all anyone can ask of you. Despite what your many admirers say, you're not a god, you're just a man and doing your best in the circumstances. Jiraiya paused, letting his message sink in before continuing. And don't let me hear you reproach yourself for trying to grab a little happiness. You have a right to it as much as anyone, and you've already sacrificed enough as it is. Minato thought about what Jiraiya said in silence for a moment. The last 8 years of his life had been so wrapped up in the village it was difficult to justify putting any part of him, or anything else first. Perhaps, he didn't have to think of it as an either/or decision though. Both Naruto and the village needed protecting. He would just have to figure out a way to protect both at the same time. Now, what's this about Pain opening the mirror from his end? Jiraiya asked, breaking the silence that had fallen. Heaving a sigh, Minato was grateful for the change in subject, but wished that the conversation could have turned to something less troubling. The other day the Anbu guards reported that the mirror was activated. Pain was on the other side. He didn't say or attempt anything, just made observations for a few minutes and then shut the mirror down again. He's learning quick. Jiraiya grunted, straining to push himself into a more upright position, only to be stopped by Minato a second time. Jiraiya grimaced but lay still. So this new seal you have, it's a last resort measure then? Minato nodded, looking back down at his papers. Let me see. Jiraiya held out a shaky hand. Oh no. Minato shook his head, pulling the papers closer to his chest. Tsunade will have my head if I let you strain yourself. You're resting, that means no work. I'm going to go nuts just lying here all day. Jiraiya grumbled, but his hand dropped immediately back to the bed. Maybe I'll set up some seals around the room and let Naruto keep you occupied. He can talk your ear off about ramen and the differences between the two worlds' miso pork flavor. Minato watched Jiraiya's heavy eyes blink as they wandered over the room. Though I have a feeling you'll be sleeping most of the time. Not likely. Jiraiya fought through a yawn. Minato shook his head. Sleep. You're not going to be any good to anyone if you don't let yourself rest and recover. Just as pushy as Tsunade. Jiraiya grumbled, but his eyes were already closed and his voice slurred as he slipped into sleep. Waiting a moment to make sure his sensei was definitely asleep, Minato gathered his things and quietly moved out of the room. He left the hospital using a side door to avoid any additional attention. He was already a little late for lunch, but started walking through the streets taking the longer route home. Rin and Kakashi knew he would be stopping by to visit Jiraiya. They would either hold it for him, or save him some leftovers. The talk with Jiraiya had given him plenty to think about and he needed a few extra moments to clear his head before arriving home and seeing Naruto. Minato didn't get more than a block from the hospital when an Anbu appeared next to him. Hokage-sama! They're attacking through the mirror, the Anbu said without preamble. The words barely left her mouth when an explosion rocked through the village. Ice growing in his chest, Minato spun and looked toward the tower and the cloud of black smoke rising into the sky. In an instant, a huge dog appeared, except it was a twisted version of a dog with 3 heads, wings, and a large piercing through its muzzle. Screams rose up from the area and alarms sounded as the dog began a rampage. Hokage-sama! One of the shinobi near him called, looking for orders. Minato didn't bother turning to him, eyes still on the attack upon his village. Jounin will contain and defeat the summons, its shinobi, and any other invading forces. Genin will evacuate civilians from the village and lead them to the shelters. They are not to go into the area immediately surrounding the battle. Chunin will conduct evacuations in the area of battle itself as well as protect the evacuation efforts. Minato looked to the Anbu still standing next to him, ignoring the "Hi, Hokage-sama" from the few surrounding shinobi as they disappeared to carry out and spread his orders. Have Kakashi meet me at the tower. Rin and Itachi are to stay at the house and guard Naruto. They are to leave the house only if there is no other option. Make sure they understand that. Then, not waiting to hear any acknowledgement, he flashed to his office. The cries of distress and sounds of battle were closer when he arrived. Glancing out the window on his way to the door, Minato could see debris and damage already in the street. Running out into the corridor, he found more disarray as clerks hurried through the hall, securing, sealing, and moving documents. A few stopped and noticed his arrival, calling out in relief. Hokage-sama! Now Hokage-sama's here, he'll take care of everything. They're in the lower levels, Hokage-sama. Darting past everyone without stopping to acknowledge their calls, Minato ran for the stairs. The floor shook a moment, and dust dropped from the ceiling as an explosion detonated nearby, closely accompanied by an outraged roar. The sound didn't seem like it would come from a dog, even one twisted and deformed like the monster he'd seen outside. Minato hoped that the intruder responsible hadn't summoned more creatures to assist in the assault. He would trust his Anbu and Jounin to contain the enemy forces for the moment. It was far more important to cut off the enemy's possibility of reinforcements, or escape through the mirror. Coming down to the first floor, Minato rushed past the main entrance. Careening around the turn to the next set of stairs, his gaze locked on the sight before him. Where there should have been a row of offices, walls, and a ceiling, there was instead a large hole, blue sky peering through buildings and the hectic street view beyond the tower walls. Minato increased his speed, leaping down the broken staircase into the lower levels below. He prayed his seal would work. He needed to end the battle quickly before the enemy could gain a foothold. Naruto made his way around the kitchen table, setting dishes down as he moved past each seat. Lunch was late today and not ramen, again, but they had added one more place setting at the table, and that made up for everything. He still thought Itachi was weird and quiet and a little intimidating, but Naruto was getting used to it. The new guard wasn't nearly as stern as he appeared to be at first. Plus, Itachi had a younger brother. When he had found that out, Naruto's first reaction was that maybe he could get a friend his own age. Then he'd found out that younger brother was the jerk-faced Sasuke. Still, he reminded himself, this was new Konoha. Perhaps the Sasuke here wouldn't be the stuck-up show-off that he was in Naruto's old Konoha. The more he thought about it, the more Naruto realized that the reasons for people not liking him in the old world just didn't exist here, as far as he could tell. In the old Konoha, he'd been alone, an orphan, and he had a reputation for always causing trouble. Here, in the new Konoha, he not only had a dad, but his dad was the Hokage. Minato even said he was allowed one prank a day, so they couldn't label him a troublemaker just for a few pranks if he was allowed. It meant he would be able to have a group of real friends, maybe even a best friend. Naruto frowned as he made a second trip around the table, setting down glasses next to the plate. The immediate people who came to mind were Shikamaru, Choji, and Kiba. They had played with him. Even if they had never been close, maybe here they could all be real friends. The more he thought about it, the more he liked the idea. Passing close to the wall as he placed the last 2 cups down, Naruto's eyes glanced over the black seal painted on the wall, like every other wall through the house. His plans for making new and ever-increasing numbers of friends in this new world would have to wait until he was allowed outside again, a prospect on which he was honestly torn. "Rin-Nizan?" Naruto asked, pausing after he set down the last glass. "Yes, Naruto-kun?" Rin asked, head still bent over the counter. She wasn't working on lunch, that was already done. She was looking over some medical report that was too complicated for Naruto to understand when he had asked about it. Naruto looked from Rin back to the window, focusing first on the scene outside, then the black markings drawn around the room at regular intervals. "What are the seals for?" There was a pause, then a sigh from Rin's end of the room. Naruto looked up and found the kunoichi watching him. "Figures I'd be the one you asked when you got around to it," Rin muttered as she moved to the table. "Sit down, Naruto-chan." Naruto pulled out the nearest chair and sat down at the end of the table. He watched as Rin settled herself, growing trepidation in his stomach at her serious expression. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it, opened it, then closed it, a grimace flashing across her face before it smoothed out again. The struggle made her look vaguely like a fish, and would have been funny to watch if Naruto wasn't getting so nervous waiting for the answer. "It's difficult to explain. It's a very complicated matter," Rin said slowly, furrowed gaze on the table. She looked up at Naruto. "The simplest way to put it is they're there for our protection." Naruto's frown deepened. His first reaction was to think they were safe in the village, but the old Konoha hadn't been safe and there was definitely something outside the house trying to get in. He could feel it every time the door opened. "Are they keeping back the thing outside?" Rin's face pinched with worry and confusion. "What thing outside?" Scrunching his face as he thought, Naruto slouched back in the chair, folding his arms over his chest. "It's hard to describe. There's something out there, but I can't see it. I think Itachi-san and Kakashi-Nizan can, but they say they can't see anything either." He ducked his head, running his hands through it. "This is too confusing." "Calm down, Naruto-chan." Rin gently tipped Naruto's chin up till he was looking at her again. "We're going to figure all of this out. Now just tell me what you can." "I don't know," Naruto said, throwing out his arms. It's more like a feeling than anything else. Like there's something out there waiting to get in, but there isn't anything." Rin thought for a moment and opened her mouth, but a loud explosion from outside cut off any reply she was about to make. Her mouth immediately snapped shut and her eyes flew to the window behind the blonde. Naruto flinched at the sound and spun in his seat, twisting around to look. His eyes found the curling smoke rising up over trees and roofs in the distance. Rin's chair roughly scraped the floor as she jumped up, toppling it in her haste, and in the next instant she was at the window. She turned and grabbed Naruto's arm, pulling him out of his chair and toward the door. "Come on, let's get you someplace more secure. There's a secure shelter in the basement." "What's going on?" Naruto asked, eyes still locked on the window as Rin quickly pulled him from the kitchen. The quick pace down the hall, being dragged by the arm, plucked at something in his memory, but it slid from his grasp. A strange sense of displacement with the same restless knocking took its place, jockeying with the growing fear in his stomach for attention. "I don't know, but I don't like it." Rin hurried them both into the entrance hall, stopping short when they almost ran into Itachi. "Itachi-san dash. Are you both all right?" Itachi asked, glancing them over, then looking out toward the window. From outside, more sounds of destruction filtered through the door and walls. Naruto tightened his grip on Rin's hand, the uneasy sense of déjà vu rising higher. He barely heard Rin answer the question before flinching back as the door opened and an Anbu appeared in the hall. "Enemies have come through the mirror," the Anbu said without preamble. "Kakashi is already on his way there. You're to stay here and guard Naruto-kun. Hokage-sama stressed not to leave the house unless there is no other choice." Rin nodded, eyes and face hardened into an expression that Naruto had never seen on her. She tightened her grip on his hand, quelling some, but not all of the panic rising in Naruto's chest. "We understand," Itachi said, expression, if possible, more serious than ever. With a nod, the Anbu spun and disappeared through the door again. As the door drifted shut, Naruto shuddered, wrapping one arm around his stomach. The feeling from before seemed worse, but he couldn't tell if it was his own panic. Itachi moved to the door in several quick steps, securing it. Another terrible crash from outside shook the ground and rattled the windows. More explosions followed the sound, all coming from the direction of the tower. Naruto heard Rin say something above him, but the words were lost to him. His eyes were locked on the door, all focus centered on what was happening outside. The village was under attack, just like his village had been. The increasing explosions from outside mirrored the ones from his dreams and the terrifying moments before he left the old Konoha. He vaguely registered Rin pulling him away from the door, deeper into the house. Panic curled its way up through his stomach, and Naruto found breathing grow increasingly difficult. It was happening all over again. Naruto didn't want it to happen again. He finally had a home, he didn't want to lose it so soon. The next explosion was close, entirely too close. It shook the entire house and rained dust down from the ceiling. Another explosion came immediately after, this one bringing chunks of the ceiling down instead of just dust. Naruto flinched against Rin, realizing after a moment they had stopped moving and that Rin was nearly crushing his hand. He looked up and blinked, unsure if this was another version of his nightmare for a moment. Bits of paper were crawling through the cracks from outside. Like little living origami creatures, they pushed their way into the building, struggling to fit between window panes and under doors. There were dozens of them coming in from the outer walls as Naruto watched in confusion. Itachi stood between Naruto and Rin and the paper. Looking up into Rin's face, Naruto saw her eyes narrowed and face set, and her other hand gripped a kunai. Naruto opened his mouth, but he never got the chance to ask a question. One of the scraps of paper flailing in the window exploded. It was a small explosion compared to the ones they could hear from outside, but it shattered the window, spraying glass and splinters in all directions. Naruto cried out in fear and surprise while Rin spun on the spot, dragging him behind her and shielding him from the debris. 2 more explosions went off in quick succession. Rin took advantage of the brief pause between the explosions and ran back the way they had come down the hall, dragging Naruto behind her. Naruto whimpered as the same turbulent sensation washed over him from the broken window. Naruto managed a quick glance over his shoulder to check if Itachi was following, but Itachi was already locked kunai to kunai with a pale, red-haired ninja. Behind them the wall was broken open as a blue-haired woman stood just outside the house and more slips of paper flew through into the hall. The paper shot toward Naruto with the speed of a shuriken. Instead of stabbing into him, though, they plastered onto his legs, stiffening till he could hardly keep up with Rin's quick steps. Naruto cried out in panic as he tripped and stumbled to the ground. Rin turned eyes wide as she saw the increasing number of paper slips attaching to him. Spinning, Rin pulled Naruto toward and past her, graping one of his legs with a glowing green hand. Naruto felt her hand run down the length of his leg in a quick motion, sweeping and cutting the paper off him, the chakra surrounding her hand crackling against him even through his pant leg. She did the same to his other side and suddenly he could move again. The relief was only temporary, though, as more paper came after them. Pushing Naruto behind her, Naruto saw a flash of hand signs before Rin blew out a strong wave of water. She sprayed it over the paper, drenching and weighing it down. Then, turned again and dragged Naruto into the entrance hall. They hadn't taken more than a few steps toward the stairs when the front door was blasted open and 3 more ninja appeared. Rin swept Naruto behind her as she faced off with the new threats. The push made Naruto stumble. His legs felt weak against an onslaught of negative emotion that reared up stronger than ever. It battled with the panic that was already coursing through him and the flashes of memory overlaying from the night the old Konoha was attacked. Clashes of metal rang in front of him as Rin defended against the 3 enemy ninja, but Naruto didn't notice. He didn't register the fight or Rin's yell for him to get back. He barely registered his own frantic realization that whatever had been outside was getting into the house and it was coming for him. He wrapped his arms around his stomach, curling into himself as he hopelessly willed it away, whatever it was. A hand grabbing his shirt and dragging him forward brought Naruto back to the events unfolding around him. It wasn't Rin dragging him to safety, it was one of the enemy shinobi, pulling him toward the broken and shattered door. Moving closer to the source of the sinister force brought feeling back into Naruto's limbs, and he dug his heels into the ground. He couldn't go outside, there was something waiting for him, reaching through the holes blasted in the protective seals. Grabbing the enemy's hand, Naruto tried to pull it from his shirt. When that didn't help, he bit down as hard as he could on the arm grabbing him. His attacker cried out in surprise and fury before hauling back and hitting Naruto across the head. The blow made Naruto see stars for a moment as the world dipped and spun as much from being hefted under the enemy's arm as from the hit itself. "Naruto!" Rin cried from somewhere, her voice reaching him as he blinked in confusion. Looking up, Naruto caught the sight of Rin holding off the other 2 enemy shinobi. Her concentration momentarily broke as she looked in panic to where he was being carried out the door. One of her opponents seized the opening and dodged forward, driving a kunai into Rin's side, then she was lost to view. Naruto gasped when he hit the outside air. It felt like it was burning. The temperature wasn't any different from inside the house, but at the same time it boiled against his skin and twisted his stomach. It was like being assaulted in his nightmare again, but he couldn't see the red mist, only feel it, and this time he couldn't wake up. He writhed, trying to pull away from his abductor, just as desperate to get back into the house as to get away from the enemy. The arm around him tightened painfully, but Naruto barely noticed. He was too caught up in the searing pain in his gut. He didn't register where they were taking him, or if the others had followed him from the house. He only knew they were moving. Then the anger seeped in with the pain. It started as something foreign, like it was alive and separate, but then it latched onto Naruto's own anger. The force fed on his outrage over the kidnapping, hurting his friends, destroying his new home, attacking his new village. It gorged and grew until Naruto couldn't distinguish between the foreign anger seeping through him and his own. It burned through him, not just in his gut but down his limbs and over his skin with such intensity that he lost track of the external world. He didn't even hear his own screams before he lost all rational thought, and the red mist blotted out everything. Chapter 17: Enemies Inside. Minato flew down the corridor wishing he had placed his transportation seals in more areas of the Hokage Tower. He'd never needed anything more than the seal in his office, though. No enemy had ever breached this far into the village. However, he berated himself for not thinking of it sooner, considering that he, himself, had created a back door into the tower. He'd been occupied with so many other things. It was a moot point in any case, and one he could deal with after solving the crisis in which they currently found themselves. The hallway was unusually bright thanks to the gaping hole in the building farther down the corridor. The added light allowed Minato to take in vital details as he sped toward the mirror room. He noticed that, besides general damage from the fight and explosion, the other door and chambers containing top-secret information and techniques were completely untouched. That fact alone strengthened Minato's belief that Naruto was the main target for the invading forces. There was also the ease with which he moved down the corridor. If it were a full invasion, the enemy would need a large force to secure and occupy a foothold. All signs pointed to a smaller force, more of a strike than invasion, and they were making no attempt to secure the tower itself, the logical choice for a foothold in the city. Growing closer, Minato could pick out the casualties scattered amongst the rubble already, mainly the onbu set to guard the mirror. Increasing his speed, he burst into the sunlight streaming into a hallway as he reached the end of the broken wall. From the corner of his eye and just over the edge of the crater, he could see one of the large invading summons sent crashing into the village wall. That would be Tsunade, he thought to himself. Hopefully, she doesn't destroy more of the village than the actual enemy. Minato focused on the goal ahead of him. One figure stood in his path, blocking him from a direct line to the mirror. The black cloak with red clouds was easy to make out. With a flick of movement, Minato had one of his kunai in one hand and a Rasengan forming in the other. As soon as he was in range, he threw the kunai, then flashed to its location seconds before impact. Instantly closing the distance between himself and his unsuspecting opponent, Minato thrust the Rasengan forward with as much power as possible. Pushing that much chakra through his still injured hands was painful, but he wanted to disable his opponent with one hit and move on to the mirror before more troops could come through. The Rasengan never hit though. It disappeared, drained away before it even touched his opponent. Minato cut short his surprise and redirected the energy to block and dodge the counter-attack. Summoning a shadow clone, he had the clone attack from one side, also using a Rasengan, while Minato himself came from the opposite side using taijutsu. Sure enough, the clone's Rasengan never made contact, dissipating into nothing before it hit. Everything Minato had seen indicated this particular version of pain possessed the ability to absorb chakra, precisely as Jiraiya had mentioned. That meant Minato was restricted to taijutsu for his offensive. It also gave insight into how the protective barrier was broken, Minato reflected as he launched a series of punches in combination with his clone. Seals and barriers needed chakra to be sustained. Take the chakra away and the barrier became incredibly weak. The clone disappeared in a puff of smoke as Minato dodged to the side. Whether the shadow clone was affected by the chakra absorption or not, he was unsure. He could tell, however, that much of what Jiraiya reported was true. His opponent had the Rinnegan and apparently could only use one special technique. The body he was facing was also extremely resilient, taking the blows Minato managed to land with almost no reaction. Aiming an attack to the pain's blind spot, Minato scowled when his opponent dodged. A quick glance around as he twisted away, Minato found the original image of pain he'd encountered kneeling on the other side of the mirror. A series of kunai flew from the corridor aimed at the pain guarding the gate. Kakashi followed immediately behind, Chidori already in hand and Sharingan uncovered as he launched toward the fight. He absorbs chakra! Minato called, pulling out another special kunai. Their opponent was fast and had the advantage of 2 sets of eyes, but with Kakashi to provide an opening, Minato knew he could get to the mirror. From the corner of his eye, Minato saw another body fall through the glass and into their world. He needed to close the portal, now, before any more enemy troops could arrive. Ending the contact between the 2 pains would also give them the advantage against the one already in their world. Minato threw his kunai at the mirror, then cursed as the pain used one of Kakashi's kunai to know his own off course. The yellow flash still transported to it, bringing himself further around their foe. Pushing off the wall as Kakashi launched an onslaught of taijutsu, Minato aimed for the mirror. He drew in a deep breath and sent a strong wind attack to the mirror, throwing debris into the air and blocking the other pain's direct view of the battle. To his surprise, some of the attack passed through portal and into the adjacent world, cutting gouges into the other room. Minato shot past the body that had just come through. Crumpled on the ground and bleeding heavily, he dismissed the new arrival as not a threat. Perhaps the ninja was a casualty from a battle occurring on the other side? Dismissing the issue from his mind, Minato slammed his experimental seal into the mirror. Behind the text spreading out over the chakra glass, he could see the remains of the wind attack sent through the crystal. The chamber on the other side had a large seal drawn out on paper and spread over the floor, but it was cut and ripped from the force of his wind attack. Minato could only assume it was the means Pain used to send troops through the mirror. He hoped the damage meant the enemy would be at least temporarily prevented from sending anyone else through in case his seal to shut down the mirror failed. Minato needn't have worried. The image flickered a moment before blacking out in the next instant. He blew out a momentary breath of relief. Behind him, a body clattered to the floor and the sounds of battle stopped just as abruptly as the mirror had died. Glancing over his shoulder, Minato could see the invading Pain crumple to the ground like a puppet. In the brief silence that followed, he heard it, a faint cracking noise. Eyes sweeping back over the blank surface, Minato found the source. The crack started somewhere behind the strip of paper bearing his new seal and spread out across the face of the mirror. It moved erratically, in fits and starts as it jumped its way from a single blemish to 3 long cracks moving across the surface. "Sensei!" The call brought Minato around, Rasengan still in one hand as he turned. There, on the ground where the most recent arrival lay, was Kakashi, badly injured and unconscious, while above him was, also Kakashi. Minato blinked, taking a moment to realize what had happened. "Damn," he said to himself, and allowed the spinning chakra in his hand to die. He turned back to look at the mirror again. The crack stretched clear across from one corner to the other, but the mirror still remained whole. The moment was gone. He'd have to put up with the thing for a little while longer if he wanted any chance to send the new Kakashi to his home world. "Damn," Minato repeated, staring at the mirror as frustration boiled inside him. Then, he turned to face the newest complication in an ever-increasingly complicated situation. "How is he?" "Not good," Kakashi said, going over the wounds of his alternate self with surprising calm, though with eyes a little wider than normal. Minato glanced up as more footsteps echoed through the hall, and reinforcements appeared with a medical team close behind them. "This one's in serious condition," he dashed. But Minato stopped, whirling around to face the blown-open section of the wall. "That chakra. Look after him!" Minato pointed at the new Kakashi, not bothering to notice the medic's confused expression as he looked from one Kakashi to the next. Minato was already gone, flashing to Naruto and the sharp spike of Kyuubi's chakra he sensed. Pain stared in growing rage at the blank chakra glass before him. He ran through the signs to activate it again. The seal allowing travel through the portal was cut to ribbons around his feet and useless, but he might be able to find a way to send chakra through to his paths on the other side. This had been their best chance to capture the Kyuubi. Now all elements of surprise were wasted, and more importantly, Conan was trapped on the other side. Nothing happened. Pain ran through the activation hand signs again, not because he thought they would work, but he was growing desperate for his remaining friend trapped in enemy territory. Still, the looking glass remained blank, his own reflection distorted by the cracks marring its surface. There had to be a way around whatever the Yondaime had done to cut off the mirror. He couldn't have lost Conan so quickly or so easily. They had been through too much, survived too much, lost too much already. Getting to his feet, Pain spun to the exit, fists clenched and determination making his limbs shake. The plan had been risky from the start, Pain knew that, but he had never expected it to fail so completely or quickly. Striding down the dark corridor and back to the research on the mirror, he ran over all the possible reasons for the failure. The primary reason was clear. He had underestimated his opponent. The Yondaime of that world had 8 more years to hone his skill and deepen his knowledge, not to mention the life experiences that he would have had along the way. No, that Yondaime would be a different person than the one who had died fighting the Kyuubi. Pain had taken too much for granted, relied too much on what he had learned and heard about the Yondaime in his own world. Plus, Naruto's appearance must have given them at least a little more forewarning than expected. Pain berated himself as he thought the situation over in hindsight. He should have anticipated a stronger resistance from the other side. Perhaps the success in the Konoha of his own world had made him overconfident, as well. He should have sent more troops, even pulled them away from the front line if necessary, and kept Conan with him in their own world. He slammed a fist against the wall, cracking the already damaged surface. The setback would have been nothing if not for the loss of Conan. Taking a moment, Pain drew in a deep breath and set aside the self-recriminations. They didn't help anything. Whatever the reasons for the failure or possible steps he could have taken to prevent the situation, they didn't change the reality of the outcome, or what he had to do to fix it. He would get Conan back and take the Kyuubi from that world even if had to build his own portal to do it. Naruto came to in a world of eerie quiet. The first thing he was aware of was the slow drip-dripping that echoed around him. The next thing he was aware of was his inability to move. He opened his eyes and found himself looking at a gigantic set of cage doors, bordered by decorative inlay on either side and stretching up to the high vaulted ceiling. He glanced down, shifting his eyes to see what was wrong with his body, and gasped. He was surrounded by the red mist, but it was more than just mist now. It was in the shape of two clawed red hands reaching out from behind the bars and pinning his limbs to the side. Naruto struggled, desperate to get free and escape. More red mist seeped in from the walls and bubbled up from beneath the water-covered floor. The more he struggled, though, the tighter the claws gripped him till it was difficult to breathe and his skin burned from the contact. A low chuckle made Naruto freeze. The sound came from behind the bars. "Well, little brat," the voice drawled in low amusement. "We finally meet." Naruto stared with wide eyes at the cage. He couldn't see much beyond the dark shadows inside, just a pair of malicious red eyes that glowed from the depths. Who are you?" The voice chuckled again, low rolling waves of sound that drew their strength from Naruto's stumbling and fearful question. "I don't suppose they would have told you," the Sandaime being the fool he was. The glowing eyes drew closer until a widely, wickedly grinning mouth appeared and soon after the face of a giant fox. Naruto looked at the fox face, sinister in the half-shadows with open-mouthed horror. He forgot to continue his struggles as he tried to understand what he was seeing. He'd only been a baby when the Kyuubi attacked and subsequently killed by the Yondaime, but he was positive that was who he was seeing. Just behind the many sharp-toothed grin and narrowed eyes he could see the shadowy flicks of tails. There were too many to count, but he knew there must be 9 of them. This had to be the Kyuubi. But how? That was where Naruto's mind stopped. He couldn't think of any explanation for it save one. Am I dead? He asked, stumbling to spit the words out in a fearful whisper. If he was dead and trapped in the same place as the Kyuubi, well, he didn't want to think of the implications that held. The fox laughed again, honest amusement mixing in with the dark enjoyment he was deriving from the situation. "No, little brat, you're not dead. Neither of us is, but you will be if you're taken by those men. Be happy I stepped in to save us." Naruto shook his head. He wasn't sure he wanted whatever kind of saving the fox was offering. "The Yondaime killed you!" It was more a knee-jerk reaction than anything else. The Kyuubi couldn't be alive. It just wasn't possible. The Yondaime died killing the demon fox. It was that act more than anything that cemented the Yondaime's stance as a hero in Naruto's old village and Naruto's own personal hero. The fact that the Yondaime in the old Konoha was also Minato and Naruto's father didn't even register at that moment. All that mattered to Naruto as he looked into the rage-filled eyes peering at him was that the Kyuubi was dead and the Yondaime killed it. The fox huffed another chuckle before propping its head on one paw. "They supposedly killed me in this world too, but am I really dead? Just look around." Naruto couldn't move his head thanks to the 2 chakra fists wrapped around his body. Instead, he rolled his eyes, swerving them across the chamber. More red mist leaked through the walls, so thick in places that he couldn't see the walls. It rolled through the bars into the cage and across the floor, merging with the chakra hands grasping Naruto. He whimpered as the grip around him tightened even more, if that was possible. Naruto didn't understand what was going on, but he could see that the red mist was mixing with the Kyuubi's chakra. With each passing moment the fox seemed to grow larger and more solid, its grip firming till Naruto felt like he was encased in rock. "That's my chakra," the fox continued, eyes roving proudly around the chamber. "Coming home to where it belongs." Closing his eyes, Naruto wished the scene to go away, telling himself to wake up and escape the awful nightmare. It wasn't a dream though, and no matter how much he tried to convince himself, Naruto knew waking up in his bed was not the way to escape the fox's clutches. He opened his eyes again, rolling them around the room in a desperate attempt to find a way out of the chamber, but the red mist had grown too thick to see the walls, much less find some manner of escape. Even if he did manage to escape the claws and get out of the chamber, how would he find his way back to the village? KH. The QB scoffed, drawing Naruto's gaze away from his search. The QB's grin stretched wider, showing his long row of pointed teeth through the bars. Wondering where we are, brat? It asked, pressing up to the cage and pulling Naruto closer to the bars separating them. The fox continued on, speaking with relish and wide laughing eyes. You don't have to worry. We're still in Konoha, not too far from your house even. Naruto opened his mouth, confused by what the fox was saying but ready to deny it no matter what. This place, wherever he was not Konoha. Don't you see? The QB continued with knowing glee. We haven't left the village because I'm inside you. I've been inside you this entire time. No matter where you go, you'll never escape me. That's not true, Naruto whispered, but it was drowned out by the QB's laugh. Of course it is. The fox grinned, showing every one of its pointed teeth, nose pressed almost through the bars. And do you want to know who put me here? Naruto struggled to shake his head, but couldn't move. He could barely breathe. It's not, he wheezed. It couldn't be true. He couldn't have the demon inside him. What did that make him? A monster too? Naruto didn't have time to ponder the subject even if he could bring his mind out of the frozen state of denial that fell over him. Itachi appeared, standing next to the large claws gripping Naruto. Straining, Naruto could barely see him from the corner of his eyes. He was just standing there facing the QB with set shoulders. Naruto wanted to tell him to run, to escape, but he couldn't whisper, much less yell. The QB's grip was squeezing all breath out of him. A Sharingan? The fox said. You must be an Uchiha. It's been a very long time since I last saw one of your clan. I have no interest in that, Itachi said, looking to Naruto. His eyes were the same red that Naruto had seen earlier at the house and focused in concentration. Itachi reached out and grabbed hold of the chakra surrounding Naruto. Like a balloon popping, the chakra expanded then burst, dissipating back behind the bars as Naruto dropped to the ground gasping for breath. He barely touched the floor when he realized it wasn't floor at all but grass. He was in Konoha again. Naruto opened his eyes to confusion. There were sounds all around him and it hurt to move his limbs, though the pain slowly faded with each passing moment. The first thing that truly registered beyond jumbled sounds and pain was the blood. It was splattered across the ground as though someone had thrown it from a bucket. The trees and buildings in the immediate area were destroyed, broken and shattered. The sounds finally fell into some sort of order, and Naruto registered a gurgling sort of gasp. He turned his head and felt his mouth go dry. Rin knelt on the scarred ground less than a stone's throw away. She was bent over someone gasping for breath. It took a moment for Naruto to realize it was one of the shinobi who tried to kidnap him. He couldn't see the extent of the injuries thanks to Rin's position blocking the way, but he could see the bright green glow of medical jutsu from the other side of her. With each gasping breath the man choked up more blood and choked and sputtered to breath. Tearing his eyes away from the sight, Naruto frantically directed his gaze anywhere but at the dying soldier. This time, however, he could pick out the other slain. Their bodies were dismembered, ripped in pieces and scattered across the landscape like the wreckage of trees and buildings. Naruto! Minato's voice cut through to Naruto, and his father was suddenly there next to him. Nausea rose up in Naruto seeing the destruction, the blood, and now his father there to see for himself what Naruto had done was too much to take. He backed away from the gruesome sight, back away from Minato, clumsily scrabbling across the ground on all fours. The destruction was all around him, though, and no matter where he turned he confronted the same sight. There was nothing in his stomach to expel. Rin didn't let him snack before meals lest it ruin his appetite, but that didn't stop the nausea. Turning over to his hands and knees, Naruto gagged on bile, spitting it out through painful, hiccuping sobs. Coughing, he turned away from the smelly patch on the ground and sucked in mouthfuls of air. He was covered in seals, the same seal that lined his room back at the house. He could see them on his arms and feel them stuck to his clothes in the way it failed to give and stretch. The chakra suppressants only confirmed what he'd been afraid of while speaking to the fox. It was him, Naruto knew it. He was the one who destroyed the landscape around. Shaking his head, he wanted to deny it, but the demon fox trapped in its cage came back to mind. I'm inside you, the QB had said, and, though everything in Naruto screamed not to believe the demon fox, nothing else made sense. Everyone in the old village had known, that was why they all hated him so much. They knew he had a monster inside of him. They knew he was dangerous. Naruto, listen to me. Minato's voice filtered in again. Naruto could feel a hand on his shoulder and another on his back rubbing circles. Just take deep breaths, Naruto-chan. Naruto shook his head frantically. He couldn't. There wasn't enough air to take deep breaths. Naruto-kun, calm down. Now, it was Itachi's voice that filtered in through the panic coursing through Naruto from the other side of him. Naruto's breathing was galloping out of control. No matter how much air he drew, he couldn't seem to get enough. Minato was speaking again, but it was almost too much just focusing on the important function of breathing. He couldn't spare any attention to the words passing over his head. Itachi had a hold of Naruto's shoulders now, trying to catch his gaze. "You must calm down." But Naruto couldn't. The frantic gasps came quicker and more uncontrolled as he thought about what the Kyuubi told him, what it meant for his life, and the destruction laid out around him. What would Minato say when he realized? Right now the man was next to him trying to comfort and calm him, but that would change once he knew the truth. Naruto couldn't bear to be left alone, not by the only father he'd known. Suddenly, he couldn't even get in the small amount of air he'd managed before. The air couldn't get past his lips. Black spots gathered at the edge of his vision. "Naruto-chan!" Minato sounded so worried, and that only made it worse. Itachi grabbed Naruto's chin and pulled it up to look directly into his eyes. Itachi's eyes seemed to glow red, the black specks swirling around the pupil. Naruto felt his own breath slowing as he watched them. His eyelids grew heavy, as well, and he felt suddenly exhausted. Naruto only broke the gaze when his eyes became too tired to keep open and he collapsed into Minato's arms in a deep sleep. Chapter 18 Fallout. Minato cradled Naruto in his arms. The boy was sleeping peacefully now, face relaxed and devoid of the anguish it held only moments ago. The tranquility was an illusion, though, brought on by Itachi's technique. Minato knew that as soon as Naruto woke again, the pain, anger, and shock would return and Minato would be hard-pressed to put it to rest. Dealing with the village and missions, for all their complexities, never came close to the difficulty and uncertainty that Naruto brought with him with each new crisis. Straightening up, Minato stood for a moment, staring at his son with a worried frown. Around them the destruction from the Kyuubi spread out almost as foreshadow for what could come. There had to be a way to stop the latent Kyuubi chakra from being absorbed by Naruto, a way to protect his son from the dangerous effects of the demon fox. Behind him, two Anbu shinobi appeared kneeling on the ground. "Hokage-sama, all threats have been neutralized. The village is secured," one of the Anbu said. Minato looked at the two. Cat and bird were disheveled and covered with cuts. The battle, though short, had been hard fought. He looked from the Anbu to the many columns of smoke trailing from the village to the skies. Several buildings were missing from the skyline. There would be casualties, injured from the battle, people caught in the rubble. He held Naruto tighter, torn between seeing to the care of the village and his son. "Sensei," Rin said, stepping forward from where the enemy shinobi lay dead. "Itachi-san and I can go to the damaged areas right now. You should look after Naruto-chan." Minato looked at his former student. She was covered in blood and dirt, much of it from the enemy she had tried to save, though a large dark spot on her side and a corresponding rip in her shirt hinted at a possible injury. He knew how much she had grown from the hesitant girl out of the academy, but there were times she still surprised him. This was one of those times. "Naruto-kun will sleep for several hours at least," Itachi said after another moment of silence from the Hokage. Sighing, Minato nodded. "Stand down from high alert," he said, giving the immediate directions he thought would be necessary. "Civilians may leave the shelters, but they may not go into the damaged areas or buildings until those areas have been deemed safe. Increase patrols around the village by half. All other shinobi are to help in the search and rescue for anyone trapped in the wreckage. I'll be along to survey the damage in a little while." Rin nodded. "Hi, Hokage-sama," she said. Then, she and the other three shinobi disappeared. Minato stood in the silence. In a few minutes others would arrive to collect the bodies of the enemy shinobi for examination. The bodies of the dead, especially those of enemies, contained vital intelligence. Even if the bodies were dismembered, like those surrounding him, they could hold clues about the enemy and their methods. Looking around once more, Minato heaved another sigh, then flashed away to his home. Once home, Minato couldn't decide if the damage was worse than he hoped or better than he feared. The house was still standing, and that was the best Minato could really say. The front door and surrounding wall were blown open, revealing the front hall to the outside. Debris from the destroyed walls and smashed furniture littered the gouged floor. Most of the windows on the first floor were shattered and several on the second floor were broken as well. Minato stepped cautiously over the threshold. The floor groaned and creaked in protest from the added weight, but quieted after a moment. Down the hallway he could see more sunlight pouring in from the new holes in the wall. Minato found the hallway lined with paper, with more scraps lying in heaps on the floor. A large collection of paper scraps lay in a soggy mess, probably Rin's doing if Minato had to guess. There were bodies here as well, 2 of them on the floor. Minato immediately recognized Pain's red hair and piercings. The other person was the dark-haired woman he'd seen through the mirror. Pain's body appeared dead, but the woman, Jiraiya had called her Conan, was merely unconscious. Minato glared at the two invaders before shifting Naruto in his arms and summoning a toad. Gamahiro appeared in a puff of smoke, pale green, and the swords he was just beginning to learn to wield strapped to his back. Minato pointed to Pain and Conan in turn as he gave his instructions. I need you to take this body to the medical examiners and this prisoner to the interrogators. Then, return here, you'll be guarding my son. The toad glanced at the two bodies before nodding, gathering up his charges, and disappearing. Minato moved back to the stairs. The damage to the building, though extensive, didn't seem to be structural, only cosmetic. Still, he took the stairs slowly, testing each as he went. The boards creaked and groaned more than usual, but not in any way that made him nervous. The second floor appeared relatively undamaged. Minato was sure if he opened the doors to rooms bordering the front of the house that there would be damage, but the hall only had a few things out of place, a shifted desk here, a broken vase there, nothing of significance. He hurried down the hall, deciding on Naruto's room after briefly hesitating by his office. The office was more secure against break-ins, but Naruto would probably feel more comfortable in his own room. Also, more chakra seals were placed in the bedroom to protect the boy. The bedroom was almost as untouched as the hall. The furniture was slightly out of place, no doubt from the explosion that blasted open the front door, but there was little else damaged in the still bare space. Minato shoved the bed back into place with one foot and then laid Naruto down, pulling the covers back to make space for the child. He looked at the suppressant seals still covering Naruto's body. After a moment's thought, he pulled away the seals that would become uncomfortable, mainly around the boy's head and neck, then tucked the blankets back up around his son. With nothing left to do but wait, Minato sank down onto the bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his son's chest. He reached out and brushed the blonde hair from Naruto's face. Naruto seemed peaceful sleeping there, but Minato knew an illusion when he saw one. The easy rest was only thanks to Itachi's genjutsu. It was as brittle and frail as colored glass. Minato dreaded Naruto waking up. How was he going to explain everything? How much did Naruto realize? Did he know about the fox? Did he know about Minato putting the fox inside of him? Minato let out a shuddering sigh, the sound loud in the heavy silence. Naruto was too young to know the truth, too young for the burden, but Minato couldn't lie to him. Pushing himself to his feet, Minato paced around the room. A large part of him wished he was back in his office or out in the street. He knew how to handle those situations, knew how to be a leader. Being a father was still shaky ground. He didn't quite know what he should do when Naruto awoke, didn't know how to explain. He shuddered at admitting to his son that Minato's own counterpart, Naruto's real father, had placed that monster inside his son. How could anyone accept that? When Gamahiro returned, Minato left, trying not to think on the guilty relief he felt upon leaving the house and throwing himself into his duties as Hokage. He'd have to face Naruto eventually, but for now he could focus on the relatively simple task of taking care of the village. It was well past sunset before Minato ordered all work to stop for the night. They had combed the debris in damaged areas and were fairly certain there were no more casualties trapped in the rubble. The dead lay in the street before the hospital, covered in white sheets and waiting to be claimed by family, or in some cases simply identified. So far, they had determined that 17 people died in the attack, mostly from the collapsing buildings, and scores more had been injured. It was a hard day for the village, the worst since the attack of the Kyuubi 8 years previous. With the border guards on high alert, Minato sent everyone non-essential home to rest. Though he didn't tell anyone directly, he knew they were far from over the difficulties caused by the mirror and the enemies on the other side of the blank glass. For himself, Minato found he was too keyed up to sleep despite the exhaustion dogging his heels. He didn't want to go home either. For the first time since Naruto moved into the house, Minato didn't want to be home. The only things that could be waiting for him at home were a long and difficult talk with his son or the long wait for Naruto to wake up from his deep sleep. Call it cowardly, but Minato didn't want to face either after the hours of searching for survivors in the rubble. Instead, Minato found himself at the door to the new Kakashi's hospital room. He still hadn't checked on the most recent dimensional traveler since the battle, besides receiving a quick message while working through the wreckage from Tsunade informing him that Kakashi would survive. However, he needed to know more. Minato needed details on how badly his student's alternate had been injured, how long he would take to recover, and most importantly what was happening on the other side of the mirror. But even with the vital intel that he needed to collect for the village, as Minato pushed the door open, the main thought running through his head was that maybe the man in this room could help him understand his son a little better. The room was dark, only the light from the hall spilling in across the tiled floor gave any visibility. Still, Minato closed the door softly behind him and stood with his back against it as his eyes adjusted. On further inspection, the scant moonlight did filter through the drapes, allowing him to pick out the dark outline of a bed, chair, and small table. Minato sighed at the dark room. He should have realized that the time would mean the patient would be asleep. Perhaps it would be for the best, though. Minato wasn't sure if he was up to talking with this other version Kakashi either, when he was really honest with himself. He shuffled farther into the room, finding the medical chart hung at the end of the bed. It took a few moments, but he managed to locate the dim yellow light the nurses on the night shift used and flicked it on. He flipped through the notes, written out in untidy, cryptic medical scrawl. He honestly wasn't sure how the medical staff got by with such poor handwriting. Of course, Jiraiya had said the same thing about Minato's penmanship when they'd first started Fuinjutsu. From what Minato could gather, Kakashi was stable and recovering, though how long a full recovery would take was still unclear. There were a few lines concerning chakra exhaustion that he could make out in the dim light, but anything more than that was lost in jumbled scribbles and abbreviated medical jargon. Minato huffed in annoyance, wondering if the hospital staff wrote that way on purpose simply to thwart nosy patients, visitors, and Hokage. Shaking his head, Minato hung the chart back on the bed and flicked off the light. He sank down into the bedside chair and ran a hand tiredly over his face. His own Kakashi could take days or even more than a week to recover from chakra exhaustion, but they didn't need this alternate Kakashi to be up and about, they just needed him to be awake and well enough to answer questions. Hopefully, that wouldn't take more than a day or two and then they could finally get some answers about the other world. Minato didn't realize he had fallen asleep until the opening door woke him. He sat still a moment, anticipating the pain in his neck when he moved from his position propped up by one supporting hand. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, slowly pulling his head upright with a grimace. He scrubbed his face, pressing his fingers into his eyes in an attempt to rouse himself faster. "Call it morbid curiosity," Kakashi said as he stepped away from the door. The copy nin moved to the bed, staring at his counterpart a moment before pulling down the blanket hiding half the face. He looks old," Kakashi said, pulling the bedspread back up to cover the patient's nose. "He's had a difficult couple of weeks," Minato said, stifling a yawn as he pushed himself to a more upright position. His eyes traveled down to the half-hidden face on the bed. "Probably had a rough couple of years," he amended. The room was still too dark to see detail, but a faint dawn light slanted across the alternate Kakashi's face, deepening lines and shadows. The silence drew out long and almost uncomfortable before Kakashi spoke again. "Rin said he's suffering from chakra exhaustion, soldier pill poisoning, and general exhaustion besides the wound in his abdomen." "Did she say when he'd wake up?" Minato asked. Kakashi shook his head. "No, but she didn't think it would be long. What are we going to do with him?" Minato tore his eyes away from the bed and looked at the man standing next to it. "What would you want in his position? How would you feel about it?" Kakashi shook his head, hooking his hands in his pockets. "I can't say. He's a different man from me. The past 8 years have given him a different life and created someone else entirely." "Fair enough," Minato nodded. "But if you yourself were in that position, what would you want? Just me as I am?" Kakashi pointed to himself with one finger. Minato had the distinct impression that the man was delaying answering, but Kakashi answered almost immediately. "I'd find my way back home. You're here, and so is Rin and everyone I care about. I don't know if he has anyone there, maybe the village is all he has left, and if that's the case, I just don't know what he'll want." Minato took in the answer, turning the problem over and over. The mirror was still relatively intact, even if it was inert. They could try to reactivate it, to send the new Kakashi back when he was fit and ready, but what would he be going back to? A destroyed Konoha? On the other hand, Minato could finish the job and smash the mirror like he had planned to at the end of the attack. A large part of him was still tempted to do just that. It was the simplest answer to their problem. "Fancy having a twin brother?" Minato asked, half in jest. "I don't think it's really up to me," Kakashi shrugged. "It's not my life so much as his that's going to be most affected. We'll just have to wait till he wakes up," Minato agreed. He couldn't destroy the mirror until he asked the alternate Kakashi about it, not in good conscience at least. It was the alternate Kakashi's choice to make. Silence fell on the two men as they stared at the dimensional visitor. Through the window drapes the sky slowly lightened as dawn approached. Minato noted the approaching day. It would soon be light enough to begin working again. They couldn't afford to waste daylight during the cleaning and reconstruction efforts. "You should go home, sensei," Kakashi broke the silence. "We can handle the cleanup, and if something drastic happens we'll know where to find you." Minato hesitated. "I need to be visible," he sighed. "The village needs to see their Hokage is present during a crisis." Kakashi crossed his arms over his chest and thought a moment. "Send a shadow clone. I'll stay with it, make sure nothing happens." Minato frowned at the suggestion, but it was half-hearted at best. The elders disapproved of shirking official duties off onto shadow clones. He was already pushing himself out of the chair, though, and preparing the hand sign needed. The clone poofed into existence, just as disheveled and dark-eyed as the original. Kakashi waved away the concerns with his usual nonchalance. If anyone asks any questions, I'll tell them you're attending to an important matter somewhere else in the village. It's true enough, after all. Rolling his eyes, Minato moved to the window. His gaze passed over the other Kakashi, still unconscious in the bed, and he briefly wondered if that alternate version of his student was as carefree and laid back as his own Kakashi. You know, Minato said, as he opened the window, we're going to need to figure out what to call the two of you when he wakes up. It'll get confusing with the both of you here, though I don't suppose he'll be going anywhere outside of the hospital for a while. If he really is my alternate, he'll be here at least a week, maybe two, Kakashi said. And not to sound childish, but I was here first, this world is my home. Let him get the nickname. Minato snorted, jumping onto the windowsill before glancing over his shoulder with one final order. When he wakes up and understands his situation, have him moved to Sensei Jiraiya's room. It'll be easier to protect them both in one location and Sensei can ask him questions. The silver-haired ninja nodded with a tilt of his head. Then Minato jumped out into the growing dawn light and turned in the direction of home. Naruto didn't know how he got to his bedroom. The last thing in his fuzzy memory had been getting ready for lunch with Rin and Itachi. Sitting up, he shook his head to try to dispel the cotton that seemed to fill it. The movement set off a series of aches and pains all through his body that hadn't been there when he last remembered. He frowned at the discomfort and the growing confusion. Clambering out from under the covers tucked around him, Naruto swung his legs over the side of the bed only to pause before dropping to the ground. Sitting next to the bed was a very large toad, different shades of pale green and over half the size of the bed. Naruto blinked at the toad, unsure what to think of his strange visitor. The toad only blinked back with two large yellow eyes. Why is a toad in my room? Naruto mumbled to himself as he attempted to rub the sleep from his eyes. He wished his brain would wake up faster. Though a part of him thought he might still be asleep. Perhaps he was dreaming, fallen asleep on the kitchen table as he waited for lunch to begin. Minato-sama asked that I watch over you while he was away tending to the village, the toad said, voice deep and a little raspy. Gah! Naruto yelled, falling farther back on the bed as he jumped. It talks! The toad tilted its chin, managing to look affronted in its own amphibian-like way. Of course I talk, it mumbled before speaking up again. My name's Gamahiro. Now show proper manners and introduce yourself. The kind tone belied the scolding words as the toad shifted around to face Naruto properly. Naruto gaped a moment, the mystery of how he got into bed forgotten with the new oddity of a giant talking toad in front of him. As Gamahiro stared, though, Naruto slowly gathered his wits. He wasn't entirely sure of the proper way to introduce himself to a toad. No one had ever showed him the procedure for introductions to other people, much less talking animals, but he gave it his best attempt. I'm Uzumaki Naruto. It's, nice to meet you. The toad nodded in satisfaction. Likewise, Naruto-kun. Naruto's stomach chose that moment to join the conversation, rumbling loudly in the pause. Ha! Naruto laughed off the sound with one hand going to his stomach and the other to the back of his head. Sorry, I don't know how long it's been since lunch. He glanced to the window, but the curtains were drawn. Now that he looked, the room itself was actually quite dim. He frowned as he tried to think if he'd actually eaten lunch or not, and how long it had been since then. Hesitating, Gamahiro glanced over his shoulder before looking back to Naruto. We can get some food from the kitchen. I believe the mess has been mostly cleaned up and there should be extra guards around the perimeter by now. The prospect of food was dampened by what the toad had said. Mess? Guards? Had something happened? Naruto didn't have time to ask, though. The toad had already turned, picking up a pair of swords Naruto hadn't noticed. Naruto moved to shuffle off the bed but stopped as he noticed the crinkle of paper stuck to his shirt. Glancing down, he saw the chakra suppression seals that were becoming steadily familiar. The sight made him freeze, an uneasy feeling growing in the pit of Naruto's stomach. Jumping off the bed with a shake of his head, Naruto followed Gamahiro out into the hall, running a few steps to catch up with the toad's hopping steps. Naruto's frown deepened and the uneasy feeling settled into a permanent nest inside his stomach as they moved down the hall and more evidence of something happening came into view. There was furniture broken and missing along with a cold draft, and the scent of fresh air wafting up from the ground floor. It wasn't until they reached the stairs, though, that Naruto saw the full extent. Frozen at the landing, Naruto looked down in horror at what was supposed to be the front hall. It was all but destroyed. The front door was missing entirely. Someone had tacked up a tarp marked with seals over the hole which blocked out the wind and elements. The floor was cracked and splintered, too, slivers of wood, debris, and paper still scattered around the floor. Even with his limited vantage point, he could tell the damage continued out of sight down the hall. The battle had raged through the house, he vaguely thought before realizing what was going through his head. The enemy had come to the house, there had been a battle from the hall and to the front door. For a moment, Naruto could remember the confusion, fighting, and fear in perfect clarity, as though it were happening again. He stood frozen on the stairs, wide-eyed and breathless as he tried to piece it together in some coherent sequence. First, there were the explosions in the distance interrupting lunch preparations, the Anbu appearing with the warning and directions to get to safety. Then, the paper lady and red-haired man had attacked. Rin was injured and the 3 other enemy ninja. Naruto gasped, breathing after what felt like minutes. The demon fox, it had been there, it had killed the 3 ninja that kidnapped him, but that wasn't right. He was forgetting something. There was more to it. Naruto-kun? Gamahiro asked. The toad was already on the ground floor, realizing the boy hadn't followed him down the stairs. The Kyuubi had been there, Naruto was sure of it, but it hadn't been there, couldn't be there since it was dead. Naruto grabbed the front of his shirt, twisting it as he remembered a choking, constricted feeling. The paper seals crinkled under the movement, making Naruto look down at them again. The light wasn't much brighter in the hall than the bedroom, but it was a little better, and the re-examination of his shirt allowed him to see something he'd missed before in the room. Blood. I'm inside you. The realization hit with the same gut-wrenching force as it had the first time. He had the Kyuubi inside of him. Naruto, himself, had killed the 3 enemy soldiers. He'd spilled the blood that dotted his arms, legs, and shirt. The seals that were scattered over the walls, tarp, and himself were for him and the demon inside of him, to keep him from hurting anyone else like he had the 3 ninja. Naruto staggered back from the stairs, all thoughts of food gone as his appetite shriveled and disappeared. Minato had been there at the scene, he'd seen what Naruto had done. Rin had been there too. What would they think of him? Naruto turned from the stairs and ran back down the hall. He skidded into his room, slamming the door behind him with a loud bang. The seal was painted large on the inside of the door in black strokes that stood out even in the dim lighting. He spun from the sight and dove under the bed, scrambling for the farthest corner. The seals covering his arms and shirt pulled at the frantic movement. Naruto's fingers itched to pull them off, but he was afraid to take them off, thinking of the destruction he'd caused earlier. The seal-lined room felt more like a prison now than anything else, and yet he wasn't sure if he didn't deserve to be locked up considering the danger he posed. He'd never forgive himself if he hurt Rin, Kakashi, or Minato, not after the kindness they'd shown him. There was a voice at the door, maybe Gamahiro, but Naruto didn't respond. He closed his eyes and willed it to go away, for once in his life wishing to be alone. Time passed, but Naruto didn't acknowledge it. It faded into a numb sense of disbelief. He couldn't sense any of the angry red chakra from the Kyuubi, but he could still see the sneering grin of the demon fox peering out at him from behind prison bars. The fox had been so real, he didn't imagine it. Then the blood and the debris afterwards, Naruto knew he didn't imagine that. The only thing keeping the awful power at bay was the seal surrounding him, so he stayed where he was in the gray shadow under the bed. A knock to the door roused Naruto from his daze. He twitched, pulling his arms tighter around his legs and wished the person would leave. The knock came again, this time accompanied by a voice. Naruto-chan? It was Minato. Naruto-chan, I'm coming in. The door latch clicked and a bright light sliced through the dim room. Naruto gasped, panicked at the thought of seeing his father or even leaving the room. He scrambled out from under the bed, ignoring the stiffness that had settled into his limbs, and threw himself against the door. The door snapped close again, Minato apparently unprepared for the sudden weight pushing against him. Don't come in! Naruto cried, choking on the words. He grabbed the doorknob and held it fast, hoping he could keep it from turning again. There was no attempt to open the door, though. Instead, a heavy silence followed Naruto's outburst. For a moment, he thought Minato had left and he was alone again, but then his father's voice came through the wood again, muted and sad. Okay, I won't come in unless you want me to, Minato said. But we need to talk. Naruto shook his head. There was nothing to talk about. He had a monster inside of him. Everyone would hate him again, and he'd be locked up and kept from hurting anyone else. I don't want to talk, he said. It was only because his head was pressed against the door that Naruto heard the heavy sigh on the other side. Naruto, you don't have to be afraid, Minato said. Everything's fine now, we've taken care of all the enemies in the village. You can come out. You're safe now, are you listening to me? Naruto turned his back to the door and slid down to the floor. He could hear his father on the other side of the wood planks, certainly, but he shook his head at the words. He wasn't safe, the people around him weren't safe. From some dim half-memory of the first attack, the one that had started everything in the old Konoha, Naruto recalled the old man saying he was the reason for the attack. Naruto reached up and grabbed his hair in two tight fists. They had been after him then, and nothing had changed. This place was going to turn into the old Konoha. The people here would hate him because of the demon fox inside, and the ninja from before would come and invade this place. They already had less than a day ago, and they would return. Naruto, talk to me, Minato said through the door, his voice closer to the ground now. Either you talk to me or I'm coming in. No! Naruto jumped to his feet again and grabbed the doorknob. You can't come in. Why can't I? Minato's response came back instantly. Give me a reason. I don't want to hurt you, Naruto cried, choking on the words. Admitting it out loud made it worse, made it twice as real. Naruto-chan, you're not going to hurt me, Minato said, followed by a weak, forced chuckle. Unless you think you're ready to beat the Hokage. Naruto let his head hang forward, thumping against the wood. He struggled with himself to speak until he finally pushed the words out. They were after me. His father's voice came through the door, equally quiet but still audible. I know. Naruto's eyes snapped open, staring at the bright line under the door. His hand shook as he turned the knob and pulled the door open, blinking in the sudden light. You did? Minato was sitting in front of the door, settled down for a long wait. He nodded, face solemn and serious, and when he spoke his voice reflected that same gravity. I want you to understand something, Naruto-chan, this isn't your fault. Cringing, Naruto turned his gaze to the floor. They want the Kyuubi. That's me. They invaded to get to me. You are not the Kyuubi. Minato's voice was stern and not to be contradicted. He climbed to his feet, a brief grimace passing over his face before he took Naruto's shoulders and gently spun him back into the room. Minato directed Naruto to the bed and settled down next to him so they were sitting facing each other on the unmade covers. Naruto-chan, I want you to listen to me carefully. I can explain this, but you have to listen. Naruto nodded, desperate to find out why he had a demon inside of him and what he could do to fix it. Minato looked at him with a pained expression before getting up and pacing the room. After a few turns, the Hokage spun back around, his once pristine Hokage's coat rumpled, torn, and stained beyond repair. Minato dropped back on the bed and ran a hand over his head with a huff. There are beings in the world that are entirely made up of chakra called Biju. The Kyuubi is one of them. A long time ago, people locked up the Biju to keep them from destroying things. It's very difficult to contain a Biju because they're all very powerful, but one of the ways is to put it in a person. But why did they have to lock up the Biju in the first place? Naruto asked, confused as he watched his struggling father. It's complicated. Minato sighed, frowning down at the bed before looking back up to Naruto. He placed his hands on either side on Naruto's face, blue gaze locked on blue gaze. What you need to understand right now is that you are not the Kyuubi. You're guarding the Kyuubi, protecting the village from it by keeping it locked inside you, but that does not make you the demon fox nor responsible for anything it does if it gets away. Do you understand? Naruto tried to nod, but he couldn't with his head captured. This is not your fault. Do you understand? Minato asked again, more insistent. His gaze was so fierce Naruto couldn't help but stare with wide eyes that stung and strained against tears. Yes, Naruto breathed, unsure if he really believed it but unable to give any other response. Minato pulled him into a crushing hug. No you don't. Minato's voice rumbled above him, more felt than heard. But someday you will. I'll make sure of it. Kakashi woke to muffled confusion. Something was terribly wrong, but he couldn't grasp what it was. His thoughts were slow and muddled, smothered by exhaustion and the distinct cottony feel of pain relievers. He forced his eyes open as fragments of memory came back. He'd been behind enemy lines, in the heart of the Hokage Tower. There'd been a fight, he vaguely remembered that, but not how it ended. There were gaps in Kakashi's memory, but one thing he was sure of, he should not be lying in a hospital bed. Based on his last coherent recollection, the best he could hope for was capture by the enemy, or death. Neither one of those options bore much hope for a soft bed in Konoha's hospital. Sliding his eyes around the room, he could see that indeed Konoha's hospital was where he was, but something was different. The hospital was on the Iiwa side of the line, Kakashi remembered, though with the advances Konoha had been making it could have already been retaken. If it had been the case, it would have been in much worse shape than Kakashi was currently seeing. Closing his eyes, Kakashi strained himself looking for any evidence of a genjutsu, but there was none that he could detect. He was missing something, Kakashi knew it, but he couldn't force his brain to work well enough to connect the clues. The door opened and he swiveled his eyes again to catch sight of who it was. His head was too heavy to turn, and moving at all reminded him of the muffled pain burning through his limbs and especially his abdomen. "Swanda-sama." Kakashi croaked, his eyes slowly taking in the blonde woman with disbelief. "You came back, did you hear about the invasion?" Swanda kept her gaze focused on the clipboard, her heels clicking against the tiled floor as she stepped up to the bed. "Never left. Minato-kun seduced me with complete control over a brand new medical program and twice the funding before I could get out of the village." Kakashi blinked, trying to sort through the information. "But I had heard." "Hemophobia?" Tsunade said. She looked up from the chart. If Kakashi had been well, he would have read the warning signs in her sharp gaze and clipped movements as she dropped the clipboard to her side. "And don't think that was easy to get past. You have the wrong village. You came through the mirror. Don't you remember?" Gathering his thoughts and memories around like so many scattered photographs, Kakashi could remember the fight right up to the point where he was run through. After that it became a little hazy. "Not particularly," he said, frowning up to the ceiling, noticing a distinct lack of a face mask. Struggling to move, Kakashi inched the blanket up toward his face. However, even that small effort drained his already tired limbs, and he was forced to stop before he made any headway. Tsunade watched with a raised eyebrow before tsuking at his efforts and pulling up the blanket to just over his nose. "You need to lie still and rest," she said, making one final note on the chart before hanging it on the end of the bed. "You're suffering from severe chakra depletion, exhaustion, and several wounds, the most extensive being the gaping hole through your middle. In all honesty, I'm surprised you're not dead considering how far you pushed yourself." Tsunade's voice took on a lecturing tone as she continued to drone on about getting rest and taking proper care of himself, but Kakashi wasn't listening. The door had opened at that moment, and a head poked through. Kakashi slid his eyes to the newcomer, hoping it was a nurse who would distract Tsunade from her lecture, but his heart froze as he took in the face peering around the door. The sound dropped away and the world seemed to stop. The brown hair was a little longer than he remembered and the clothes were different, but everything else was the same, from the kind eyes to the purple markings on either side of her face. "Rin," Kakashi breathed. His only focus was on the startled face looking back at him from the doorway. "Idiot! What are you doing?" Tsunade said, the words lost on Kakashi. "You're not strong enough to be moving around. Get back in bed!" Kakashi had no time to heed the orders. He failed to register getting out of bed and immediately collapsing to the floor. He could only stare at his old teammate alive again in white-faced amazement as she rushed to his side and helped Tsunade lift him back to the bed. "Rin," Kakashi choked, struggling to reconcile the last time he saw his friend and the grown woman beside him. It was too much to take in with the chakra exhaustion and injury. It all combined to overwhelm him, and before he could gasp out anything more the world tilted, heat rushed to his face, and dizziness overtook him, plunging him back into darkness. Chapter 19, Taking Stock. "Something's happened," Sarutobi said as he looked down at the map showing the latest distribution of forces within Konoha. The Iwa forces were still slowly retreating as the defending Konohanin retook their village, but that was not what occupied Sarutobi's attention. The new development that caught his eye was the change within the Amegakure lines. By all reports, the Aimnin had reconstituted, cut off the little help they were giving to the Iwa forces and focused their positions around the Hokage Tower. The distribution of troops was distinctly defensive, with no indications they were preparing to attempt for any more territory. Considering the advance of the Konoha forces, the Ame forces would soon be completely separated from their ally, making each more vulnerable. Tactical logic said the invaders should avoid that at all costs. Unless, Sarutobi thought to himself, a cold hand gripping his heart, Aim's tactical goals had changed. "Have there been any unusual chakra signatures coming from the Ame lines?" the old Hokage asked, glaring at the circle on the map depicting the tower. The aide next to him stumbled, searching through the many reports from the day. For a moment, the only sound in the room was paper crinkling from the stacks of already wrinkled reports. "Yes," the Chunin said, scanning over a scrap of rice paper before holding it out with one hand to Sarutobi. The other hand was bandaged and bound close to his side. He'd been wounded in action and was now fit for nothing more than helping the Hokage shuffle through paper. "But it was only a small chakra flare originating from the tower." Sarutobi scanned the paper, feeling his heart constrict in dread. The chakra levels in the report, documented in detail by Konoha's best censor, would not be anything unusual, normally, but the location the chakra was concentrated in was worrying. The lower levels of the Hokage Tower were shielded to prevent chakra from the classified experiments and activities from leaking through and troubling the general population or raising unwanted questions. If the tower and shields were damaged, any chakra activity in the lower levels would start to leak through in muted levels. The fact that their sensors were picking up on anything from the tower close to average chakra levels was very troubling. Shifting his gaze back to the map, the Hokage ran his eyes over the line where the Iwa and Ame forces met. He wished Shikaku were present to consult with, but the noted strategist was personally checking on ground situation at the moment. He would have to inform Shikaku of the new development when the Jounin commander returned. Have our forces put pressure on this point between Iwa and Ame. We'll drive a wedge between the two and isolate them. Keep the Iwa troops in check, but focus on the Ame lines. They needed to get to the tower as quickly as possible. Conan woke in a dim and bare prison cell. The fact that she had been captured was self-evident, but it took a moment to understand how. Waking was like coming out of a deep sleep, more like regaining consciousness after being knocked unconscious. That, combined with the slight muzziness and disorientation, convinced her she'd been caught in a genjutsu. Conan grimaced at the wall, silently berating herself. There were few who could trap her in such an attack, but she had not expected to face an Uchiha, especially not Uchiha Itachi. That was the danger of running into a battle without knowing your enemy's strengths beforehand. Conan sighed, rebuking herself all the more. She had known the dangers. She should have brought them to Nagato's attention directly. It would have done no good, though. He'd known the danger as well as she, and he was right. They needed the Kyuubi, and the invasion of Konoha could be their only chance to acquire it. For a brief moment during the battle, Conan had thought they were going to succeed. It had started so well. The Anbu guards watching the mirror were woefully unprepared for Pain's strength, and they'd had the additional luck of one guard knowing the Kyuubi's location. Ninjendo easily ripped the information from them along with their spirit. Then it was only a matter of hiding their chakra en route, while the diversion drew all the attention. That was before they ran into Itachi. Now, though, she wondered if capturing the demon fox would be possible considering all the defenses surrounding it. If it had been anyone else she would have said no, but Nagato had never failed at anything he set out to do. If anyone could do it, he could. Pushing her still waking limbs to a standing position, Conan forced herself to walk around the small cell. The first short lap was to get her legs working properly, the second was to examine the room. There were no windows, in the door or the walls. The only light in the small room came from under the small crack beneath the door. It filtered into the gloom and gave the barest form to the pallet bed she had woken up on only minutes ago. The light was too dim to see the walls properly, but Conan was sure they had chakra suppression seals embedded into them. Feeling along the door, she found a slot that could be opened for meals or conversing through the otherwise heavy metal barrier. She settled herself back onto the meager bed and considered her current situation. They had taken all of her possessions, changed her into a loose-fitting prisoner's shirt and pants. In the dim light she couldn't find any suppressant seals on her person, and the chakra seals for the cell would almost certainly not extend out into the hallway. They wouldn't want to handicap their own guards in maintaining control of the prisoners. It meant Conan would need a way out of the cell without chakra unless she could find a way around the seals, but once she was out she would be able to use her techniques again. She could perhaps manage something small if she got a hand through the slot in the door. There was no latch to open the slot from inside, most likely it was secured against any prisoner attempting to open it. It all meant that Conan's best chance to escape would be when they took out to question her, and they would question her. She had too much valuable information they could use for them to not question her. After that, it would be a matter of getting into the Hokage Tower and back through the mirror to her own world. Retrieving the Kyuubi on her own, while an attractive idea, was unrealistic, and though the idea of being able to get back to Nagato was also unrealistic, it still had more potential than the former. Her first goal was to get out of the prison where she was being held. Eyes roving the cell for any previous unnoticed vulnerability, Conan waited for her chance. He was in a new room. That was the first thing Kakashi noticed the next time he opened his eyes. It was bigger than the first one, judging from the size of the ceiling. Moving was still difficult and painful, though not as difficult as the first fuzzy recollections he had of waking up. The rustle of scroll paper caught his attention, and for a moment Kakashi cursed himself for not noticing another person in the room right away. It took effort, but eventually he managed to turn his head toward his company. A heavily bandaged Jiraiya sat in the neighboring bed. He was propped up by pillows with his long white hair hanging loose around his shoulders. The older man frowned down at the scroll in his lap. It was a moment before he registered Kakashi's gaze and looked up from the scroll. "Well?" Jiraiya said, an earnest grin splitting his tired face. "Look who's awake again." "Jiraiya-sama," Kakashi said in the half-croak he had been speaking in since waking. He had heard the Toad Sage had returned to Konoha to help battle the invasion, but hadn't seen it himself. Wait, Kakashi paused, hadn't Tsunade-sama said this was the other Konoha? Squeezing his eyes shut, Kakashi brought one heavy hand up to rub at them. only dimly acknowledging the action. "You're a little confused still," Jiraiya said, deep voice resonating from the neighboring bed with amusement and pity. "This is another version of Konoha. One where dash." "Yes," Kakashi croaked, not wanting the man to go any farther. The image of Rin standing in the doorway flashed through his mind and he didn't want to hear any more, only just starting to come to terms with the painful ramifications of his situation. There was a moment of silence as Kakashi fought to control himself. Jiraiya broke the pause with a light tone. "They put you in here so I can keep an eye on you." Kakashi seized on the lighter tone as he finally regained his customary apathy and pulled his hand away from a bland expression. "As if you're one to talk," he said, eyeing the bandaging covering much of Jiraiya's visible body. Jiraiya sniffed, turning his nose up and away. He smoothed out the scroll laying across his lap as he returned his gaze to the sealed diagrams covering its surface. "I'm a model prisoner, patient, unlike you, trying to get out of bed after suffering severe chakra depletion and being impaled." A pair of footsteps stopped outside their room. Jiraiya threw his blanket over the scroll before dropping himself down on his pillows with a strangled gasp as their door slid open to reveal Tsunade. "You're awake, good," Tsunade said, moving to Kakashi's bedside. She lifted the chart and notes hanging off the foot of the bed frame and started leafing through the pages with a furrowed brow. "You didn't do yourself any favors with that stunt you pulled earlier. I've been tempted to keep you sedated just to give your body time to recoup before your mind gets thrown any more unexpected surprises." Kakashi struggled to sit up, but ceased his efforts at a glare from Tsunade. "I actually feel much better than I was expecting," he said, telling the truth. In all reality, several days ago he had expected to be dead, so anything more than that was an improvement. Tsunade nodded, gesturing to a series of green crystals set on seals and positioned around the bed. Kakashi blinked, noticing them for the first time and rebuking himself for the slip. "They're chakra crystals," Tsunade said, hanging the chart back on the bed. "They emit a low level of healing chakra in the immediate vicinity. It helps the body recover faster from exhaustion and overdoing it like you have. However, the hole through your middle will still have to heal the slow way, so don't go thinking you can get out of bed and move around. I'm not above tying you down if I have to." "And she means it," Jiraiya said with a warning nod. "You too," Tsunade growled, her hair whipping around her shoulders as she turned to glare at Jiraiya. The old man flinched back from the gaze, eyes going over wide. "No," Tsunade said, turning back to Kakashi. "You're going to have to convince me that you won't try anything stupid, like getting out of bed, or collapsing if I'm going to allow visitors." Kakashi had doubts about how many visitors he could possibly have in an alternate dimension he had never been to before, but there was Rin and Naruto. That was 2 people, at least. So, he nodded his head with an earnest expression. "I'll be fine." Tsunade stared at him from the foot of the bed, arms crossed just beneath her ample chest. "I doubt that," she said, but didn't comment further. "Is that why you climbed out of bed? Because he saw someone?" Jiraiya asked, alternating between looking at Kakashi and Tsunade. Kakashi faltered at answering. He didn't want to provide a history about why seeing Rin affected him so much, but he didn't need to. Tsunade was already nodding for him. "Took one look at Rin and fainted dead away, after trying to reach her." "Rin?" Jiraiya's knowing grin split his face. "You lover boy, you. Is it a very serious romance in your world?" "No, wait. You've been separated by the invasion, and you weren't sure if she was alive or dead." The old writer grinned, twisting his hands together. "I can just picture it now. I might even make it the plot for my next book. Don't worry, I'll change the name so no one will know it's you." "Eh?" Kakashi gaped, wide-eyed as he looked at Jiraiya. "Ignore him," Tsunade said with an eye roll and a glare sent to the old man. "He's been trapped in here too long already, but unfortunately he's still not well enough for us to kick him out." She turned her attention back to Kakashi. "Considering the classified nature of how you came into this world, your presence here is considered a state secret, but I'll let the Hokage know he and a select few will be permitted to visit now." "Thank you," Kakashi said. He tore his wide eyes away and struggled to place a neutral expression on his face. He thought a moment before asking, "Who is the Hokage here?" There was a pregnant pause as the medical nin measured him with her gaze, seemingly assessing his vitals with a mere look. "Namikaze Minato is currently the Yondaime Hokage." Kakashi made an extra effort to keep his face composed. He only managed it because of the mask. He should have expected that. There was the vaguest memory of the yellow flash streaking past him just before he blacked out during the battle. He thought it was a delusion, but that probably was Minato, racing to close the portal as fast as the yellow flash had ever been. Tsunade spoke again, drawing Kakashi out of his circling thoughts. "He may be by in a day or two to visit and ask some questions, so it's just as well that you have some advance warning. It'll come as less of a shock, I suppose. As it is, between the secret nature of you being here and your previous reactions, for the time you'll only have a limited number of approved visitors, the Hokage, Naruto, and I suppose Rin and your counterpart if you think you can handle it. Hopefully you won't swoon all over yourself again. I didn't faint, Kakashi said. Really, people were making too big a deal about him passing out after seeing Rin. Tsunade rolled her eyes, turning toward the door as her heels clicked across the tiles. Get some rest, lover boy. You're still recovering. I'm not a lover boy, Kakashi said, but the door was already swinging shut behind the medic. From the bed next to him, Jiraiya just laughed. I think it's too late to protest. Jiraiya grinned. Well, at least I'm not afraid of Tsunade-sama, Kakashi muttered, looking pointedly at the scroll still hidden under Jiraiya's blanket. What? The older man shrugged, pulling out the forbidden object. She's scary. You haven't seen how scary she can be, so I don't want to hear it. Jiraiya turned back to the scroll. Kakashi knew the Sannin medic could be scary, but he was sure he'd never been misfortunate or thoughtless enough to incur the woman's true wrath. He'd take Jiraiya's word for it. Silence fell over the room, punctuated by the occasionally crinkle of Jiraiya's scroll and a pen against paper. Kakashi tried to imagine what it would be like being confronted by Minato-sensei. The last time he'd seen the man had been the day of the Kyuubi's attack. Then there was Rin, as well. How could he explain why he reacted as strongly as he had? He honestly didn't want to think about his counterpart, what he would have been if he had grown up in the happier world. This felt too much like a dream, and he was still too numb to process any of it. Is the village secure? Kakashi asked, staring at the ceiling. The village is secure, Jiraiya said. And the mirror? You don't have to worry about any of that at the moment, the old Sannin said with easy reassurance. You can rest for now. Sighing, Kakashi repositioned himself before closing his eyes, intent on more sleep. Pain bent over the mountain of scrolls and papers heaped upon the Hokage's desk. Frowning down at one passage, he reached for another book and slapped it down next to him. A pile of messages from the Iwa commander toppled to the ground in a flurry of paper. Most of them remained unopened and unread, and the few Pain had deigned to look at he no more than skimmed. He had no interest in Iwa's weakening position or in keeping the city in the long term. The invasion had served its purpose. Not only had Konoha's power been drastically cut, so had Iwa's strength been radically reduced, particularly after the Konoha forces eventually drove them from the city. Those were two of the three main forces that stood as a threat against Amegakure and Pain himself. The Kyuubi would keep all others in check, but a new objective had risen before all others, and it drove him to his frenzied search over papers and theory. He had to get Conan back. Pain couldn't bear losing the only remaining person he considered family. His parents were gone, Jiraiya-sensei had abandoned them, Yahiko was gone. Conan was all he had left. He forced back the self-recriminations at sending her on such a dangerous mission in the first place. He should have considered the maker of the mirror, the blasted fourth Hokage himself, would have a way to sever the connection between the worlds. The Kyuubi was important, and he knew sending his paths on the mission was the only solution possible, but he should have sent another path of Pain, not Conan. He could always find new bodies for the paths, but his childhood friend was irreplaceable. And now she was captured. Glaring down over the papers and charts, Nagato willed something more to jump out of the pages, anything that would help him reopen the mirror or even build another if it was the only way. He'd misjudged his move when he'd opened the mirror without fully understanding it. It was a mistake he didn't often make, but they'd been so close to the Kyuubi and its vast and unique supply of chakra. Pain paused, gaze focusing on somewhere beyond the scroll in front of him. Chakra. The mirror worked entirely off of chakra. Pushing papers aside, Pain dug out the chakra diagram he had made of the mirror, eyes devouring the schematic with frantic concentration. The crystal itself naturally connected the two worlds by its very existence. In a sense, there was only one mirror and the worlds branched out from it like two sides of a window. The only thing that determined whether the connection was usable was the amount of chakra that went through the crystal. There needed to be a minimal amount for the mirror to open that was simple to understand and see. The crystal was designed to withstand immense amounts of chakra thanks to the high concentration of chakra which was required to simply make a visible connection. The seal that the Yondaime used to shut down the mirror used an even greater amount of chakra to overwhelm those same systems and shut them down immediately. But what if Pain introduced a small amount of chakra to the mirror, a minuscule amount? All Pain really needed to do was reopen the chakra paths, and a slow, steady stream of chakra might just coax the channels open again. Pain pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, ready to set down his plan. It would take time, longer than he really wanted. There was also the matter of how he would retrieve both Conan and the Kyuubi back from a world defended by the Yondaime Hokage. If the choice came down to one or the other, Pain knew he wouldn't be able to leave Conan behind. Still, that decision would come after he could open the portal again. Any plan he devised later would have to start with opening a door back into that other world, and time was of the essence. The key to fixing the mirror was chakra, and that was something Pain had in spades. Minato focused on the task before him, brush in one hand and can of chakra-infused paint in the other. It was a good break to focus on one simple task for a moment instead of trying to unravel the extremely complicated situation that had developed. His hand remained steady, tracing the outline of the seal even as a gasp cut through the quiet behind him. Finishing the complicated design, Minato glanced behind him to the bed, offering an apologetic smile as he sidestepped to a new spot on the wall. "Sorry if I woke you," he said to the wide-eyed Kakashi. Jiraiya slept soundly across the room, a soft snore reverberating through his lungs. Part of Minato wondered if Tsunade was drugging her fellow Sannin to keep him in bed. "It's all right, Hokage-sama," Kakashi said, voice quiet and hesitant, eyes never wavering from Minato's face. "I probably should have given you more warning. This has been a shock to you." Minato looked over his student's counterpart, noting the still pale and drawn face. This was probably like seeing a ghost for Kakashi. Minato remembered how he felt the first moment he realized who Naruto was. Shocked was probably an understatement. Even with that, Kakashi still looked better than the last time Minato had seen him. "It's all right," Kakashi repeated, tearing his eyes away to look down at his knees with a frown. "Tsunade-sama told me you were Hokage, but I don't think any amount of warning would have helped. At least, you didn't faint like when you saw Rin-san. Tsunade would have thrown me out." Minato's attempt at levity fell short, drawing only the thin outline of a weak smile from the silver-haired man. An awkward silence descended for a moment before Minato asked, "How are you feeling?" "Better than I would have expected," Kakashi said, carefully pushing himself up into a sitting position. "I think I have Tsunade's chakra therapy to thank for that." Minato nodded, glad he had given the medical expert as much support and leeway as he had. There'd been a lot of pushback from the old warhorses when he'd first backed Tsunade and expanded the village's medical division. The move had been expensive at first and drew needed manpower from other divisions, but it was moments such as these, when developments such as the chakra therapy proved their worth, that he counted his blessings he hadn't listened to the naysayers. "Are you feeling up to a few questions?" Minato asked. "You want to know how it all started and what the current situation is?" Kakashi, ever the skilled shinobi and sharp mind, knew exactly what Minato needed to know. Minato nodded, eyes glancing to the door to make sure Tsunade wasn't coming back. Tsunade would disapprove. Kakashi needed more rest, but time was not on their side, and Minato knew Kakashi was tough. The white-haired man could take it. After all, no matter what universe he was from, Minato had still trained this man. Kakashi was silent a moment as he visibly assembled his thoughts. "It really started over a year ago. We started receiving intelligence about an underground criminal organization called Akatsuki. The intel didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary at first. It was all just rumors about a new gang trying to carve a niche for themselves. Then, our operatives working the case started disappearing. There were reports of attempts to gain information on the bijou, not just one or two from a specific nation, but all of them, the Kyuubi included." "How widespread was the information that Naruto was the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki?" Minato asked. He didn't want to interrupt Kakashi's story, but he was impatient for any information he could gain on his son. Kakashi shook his head, a small, pained movement, but better than what the silver-haired man could do a few days ago. "The Sandaime declared the information a Class A secret and ordered everyone in the village to never speak of it, especially to Naruto. He had hoped the younger generation, Naruto's peers and all others that came after, would not inherit the prejudice that came with the knowledge, but they still learned to ostracize him from their parents. They just didn't know why." Minato finished for him, grimacing to himself. Laws could not change human nature, no matter how well-intentioned they were. Kakashi dropped his eyes, face drawn by a frown in silent agreement. Minato shook himself back to the conversation. He glanced back to the wall, before giving up the thought of painting any other seals during the conversation. "Please continue." "We received word that Iwa was increasing their troop movements," Kakashi said after a moment, picking up where he left off. "At first, it was thought to be training, something to keep an eye on, but nothing to cause too much alarm. Then, the units disappeared from our surveillance. The next time we saw them, they were at the edges of the village." Minato squeezed his eyes close, pinching the bridge of his nose with his free hand. The other was occupied by the paint can and brush. That was a situation no leader wanted to encounter, suddenly confronted by a large military force appearing at your gates. With little to no warning, it was a nightmare. "How much of the village were they able to take?" Kakashi ran a tired hand through his already mussed hair. When I left, they had the Hokage Tower, the front gate, and the hospital. At the high watermark, they had control of perhaps 60% of the village, but we've been gaining ground. They might even have taken back the main gate by now. Minato shook his head as he moved to the bedside chair. He placed the paint can on the floor, setting the brush on top of it before leaning his elbows onto his knees. How many casualties have you suffered? Too many, came the brief reply. Kakashi drew in a breath before he continued in a level tone. We got the civilians in the shelters as quickly as we could. There's been much talk of moving them away from the village entirely, but we don't have the manpower to protect them, and there's the worry the enemy will attack them on the road to draw our troops away from the front lines. The higher-level shinobi have mostly survived with only minor injuries and fatigue, but the junior ranks, they just weren't prepared for all-out war. It's been so long since we had one, almost 10 years. You don't need to explain, Minato said, catching Kakashi's eye. I understand. It had been a decade since Minato's own Konoha had been to war. They still trained the shinobi recruits as well as they could, better even since they didn't have to rush their young immediately out onto the battlefield. However, training only went so far, and the practical experience most shinobi acquired these days ran along the lines of conducting patrols, fighting criminals, and one-on-one combat, not full-fledged battles to the death between armies. The mentality was just different, more brutal. Is there any sign the enemy will bring in reinforcements? Would you be able to stop them if they tried? Minato asked. He needed to understand the situation in its entirety. I don't think they'll be able to move in any more troops, Kakashi said through a thoughtful frown. There are two groups that made up the invading forces, Iwagakure and Amegakure. The Iwa forces seem to hold the most ground of the two, but Aim's troops hold the tower. Kakashi glanced around himself a moment, and Minato, anticipating his needs, found a sheet of paper for him. At first, they were working together, but in the last few days our intelligence has been reporting that the Ame forces have been focused on holding the tower and nothing else, even though the Iwa troops have been losing some of their ground, Kakashi said as he drew out a sketch of the city and the front lines as they stood the last time he knew. When the invading forces gained a foothold in the city and it became obvious we wouldn't be able to push them out immediately, the Sandaime ordered some of our forces to gather the patrols and form a line to prevent any enemy reinforcements from getting through. It made defending against the invasion a little more difficult in the short term, but we can't afford the enemy to receive and relief. Minato nodded as he looked over the map and disposition of Kakashi's village. It was a difficult situation no matter how you looked at it, but if Kakashi was correct and Iwa's forces had started losing ground, the other Konoha might still be salvageable. The Sandaime believed the invasion had at least two purposes, Kakashi said after a moment. One being to reduce our military power, which they certainly have done, and the second to acquire the Kyubi, which they're still attempting. Minato agreed. Laying the map on the bedside table, he pushed himself out of the chair and moved back to the next space on the wall needing a seal. I'm going to have Naruto moved here for the time being. The house needs repairs and I can't spare enough shinobi to look after him with the increased patrols, repairs, and wounded. Minato finished the seal and shuffled down to the next spot. He'll probably be bouncing off the walls by the end of the day, so hopefully it'll only be a temporary situation until there's a better solution to be had. At least, Minato was hoping Naruto would be bouncing off the walls. That would be better than the semi-depressed funk that the boy had been sliding into since learning about the Kyubi. He glanced back when the silence stretched longer than he expected. Kakashi's eyes were fixed on his lap, but his gaze was unfocused, a million miles away. His Adam's apple bobbed a few times as he swallowed, then cleared his throat. We'll look after him, sensei, Kakashi said. His voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. He seemed paler than he was when he first woke up. Minato's face crinkled with worry, tempted to ask what had happened to Kakashi since his counterpart's death, but he held himself back. Kakashi had always been reserved, and this one seemed more so than his own. I know you will. Minato threw a weak smile over his shoulder before turning back to his seal. I will have guards here looking after the three of you, so if for some reason you are threatened by an enemy, let them take care of it. You and Jiraiya are to focus on getting yourselves and Naruto to safety. Neither of you are in any shape to fight if you can avoid it. Hi, Hokage-sama, Kakashi said, voice subdued. You should know Naruto's been having difficulty with the Kyubi's chakra since arriving here. I won't go into all the details, but in this world the Kyubi was temporarily dispersed, leaving behind its latent chakra. The chakra is being drawn to Naruto and entering through his seal, making it difficult for him to control the Kyubi. These seals help control the problem, and I'll leave you both plenty of chakra suppressant seals in case you need the safe area. I'm not expecting there to be any instance where that becomes necessary, but it's best to be prepared. We've had more than our fair share of bad luck, Kakashi agreed. His voice came just above a murmur and was followed by a loud yawn. Get some sleep, Minato said. The suggestion was unnecessary. He could already hear Kakashi's breathing even out behind him. Hours later found Minato in the lower levels of the Hokage Tower staring at the cracked mirror as he thought about what Kakashi had revealed concerning what had happened on the other side. He ran a hand over the black glass, touch feather light, barely brushing the uneven cracks marring the surface of the mirror. Grabbing a light, he turned it one way then the other as he bent to see the damage from all angles. In some ways, the natural sunlight that filtered though from the hole in the ceiling and wall hindered his ability to fully examine the mirror by washing out the more direct artificial lights. He'd compensated by commandeering some of the very bright surgical lamps from the hospital, thankful that they had enough spares in storage to accommodate him. The cracks radiated out from Minato's experimental seal, fracturing the muted image reflected by the inactive mirror. With the flurry of Kakashi's double coming through and Naruto's incident, then with the needs of his son and the village, Minato hadn't had a chance to thoroughly examine the damage until that moment almost 2 days after the fact. The fractures were superficial, none of them deep or wide enough to risk shattering the mirror in half, but they were still enough to break up the dull image reflected back in a kaleidoscope of shapes. Minato traced the larger cracks with a frown. Some of them were sharp enough to cut, but there was something more going on beneath the surface. Closing his eyes, Minato flattened his palm against the fractured crystal. He sat still a moment, letting himself feel the mirror under his hand. With the seal he had created, the chakra crystals should be inert, similar to any ordinary rock picked off the ground. The chakra flow should be cut and incapable of moving through the channels until the seal was removed. That was if the technique worked as it was meant to, that is. It was all so experimental, from the mirror to the various seals developed to control it, there was really no way to be sure how anything to react. Minato felt it after a few moments. Sitting completely still, focusing on nothing but the mirror under his hand, he could just trace the barest hint of chakra running deep under the surface. It was faint, could be completely missed in a cursory check, but it was there pulsing along the cracks created by his seal. The sensation was so faint it felt more like an echo, but despite this he could tell the chakra was not his own. At first glance, the faint chakra pulse didn't seem to be doing anything. The looking glass was designed to handle a much larger flow of power to make it work, but looks could be deceiving. Just because it didn't seem to be doing anything didn't mean it was benign. Examining the mirror again, Minato found nothing that could be the cause of the faint chakra traces, which meant the chakra flow was likely coming from the other side and the enemy. Sitting back on his heels, Minato glared at the one-time science project turned dangerous threat. Even deactivated, the mirror remained a liability. The temptation to destroy the mirror was still strong, but so was the desire to help the other Konoha. Then, there was the other Kakashi. He deserved a chance to at least try to go back to his world if that was what he wanted. Pain was attempting something. His next move, in the other world, certainly another attempt to get the Kyuubi and retrieve the prisoner, Conan, Minato's Konoha held. There wasn't enough information to know exactly what technique Pain was attempting, but based on what Minato now knew from the other Kakashi, he was certain it was another method to open the doorway between their worlds. Minato couldn't continue to wait for the enemy to make their move, and he wasn't quite ready to completely destroy the mirror, either. He needed to develop his own plans past simply defending his Konoha from invasion. Pushing to his feet, he turned back toward the stairs and his office. It was time to go on the offensive.